Chapter 120. Lin Sun suddenly stood up. He couldn't go back to Camp 39, but when he heard the conditions given by young man, Lin Sun breathed a sigh of relief. He sat back in the chair and fell into meditation. From today on, if he promised to stay here and assist old Mo to refine the new Zing battleship, he could get a bottle of condensate pills and 10 points every day. Moreover, Lin Sun didn't need to participate in all kinds of cruel training, which meant he wouldn't be eliminated. The conditions were really attractive, but Lin Sun couldn't agree to it. He didn't come to the training camp to enjoy life, but to become stronger. Lin Sun would never forget the helplessness and anger he felt when he was persecuted by Yao Tuahai in Donglin School, and he could do nothing but wait for death. Nor would he forget the powerlessness and grievance when he could only watch Xia Ji being taken away by that classical and noble woman. The training in Bloodthirsty Camp gave Lin Sun a chance to become a real overmatch. Even if the training was cruel to the extreme, it was obvious to improve his fighting capacity. Lin Sun wouldn't give up all this. I can promise to assist old Mo, but I can't give up various training subjects in Camp 39. Lin Sun seemed very firm and unquestionable. Do you like self-abuse? Young man asked with interest. Lin Sun was not in the mood to joke. He shook his head and said seriously, I want to be stronger. Young man stared at the teenager's firm eyes and suddenly said, In fact, you don't have to be so troublesome. If it's just those training subjects, I can help you. You? Lin Sun was stunned, looking at young man's beautiful and sexy face. He seemed to make sure whether she was joking or not. What? Do you look down on me? Young man combed her long hair behind her ears as she slightly straightened her back, and her pair of clear and lively eyes were suddenly suffused with a wisp of an extremely fierce and oppressive aura. It was as if she'd instantly become a different person, and her charming and sexy aura was replaced by a terrifying aura. Lin Sun was stiff all over. He felt as if his skin was pricked by needles, and his soul couldn't help but tremble slightly. He finally realized that the sexy and beautiful beauty in front of him was actually an extremely terrible overmatch. Lin Sun could see a clue just from a wisp of terrible breath that she emitted inadvertently. The training programs in Bloodthirsty Camp are just child's play and can only be regarded as cruel. I have a lot of training programs that are crueler than those. If you want to have a try, I can personally be your training partner. In an instant, young man regained her sexy and languid look. She looked at Lin Sun with a slightly flirtatious look, opened her red lips slightly, and exhaled a fragrant breath. This opportunity is very precious. Others can't get it no matter how hard they try. At this time, old Mo in the distance also said with a smile, Boy, this is a blessing in disguise. If you meet an instructor like young man, you will have no regrets, even if you're trained to death by her. Young man glared at him coldly with her starry eyes. Old Mo immediately lowered his head and shut up obediently. Lin Sun was indeed tempted, but at this moment, the warehouse door was kicked open with a bang. Young Ku's upright and aloof figure in a military uniform appeared in front of the door. Her delicate and fair face was as calm as usual, but in Lin Sun's eyes, Drill Master Young Ku was full of killing intent at this moment, which made the atmosphere in the warehouse more solemn. You are my trainee, of course. I will train you alone every afternoon from tomorrow on. Young Ku stared at Lin Sun and said these words coldly. Then she turned around and left, without looking at others from beginning to end. Although Young Ku left, the atmosphere in the warehouse was a little quiet. Old Mo looked at young man. It was unknown what he thought of, but he couldn't help sighing, shaking his head and continuing to study those spiritual tattoos. And young man fell into silence. Lin Sun could be sure that young man and young Ku must be a pair of twin sisters, but there was obviously something wrong with their relationship. He couldn't say much about it. It's also nice to have young Ku train you alone, young man said with a smile after a long time. But Lin Sun always felt that she was a little absent-minded when she smiled. The next morning, when they were ready to start the day's training, all the trainees in Camp 39 found that one person was missing today. Young didn't give any explanation for this. Other trainees inevitably had many thoughts in their minds, but Ning Ming resisted the impulse to ask. At breakfast, Lin Sun was still not there. Many people thought that Lin Sun might have been eliminated by Drill Master Young Ku because his score was at the bottom. Ning Ming couldn't help frowning. What is wrong with this guy? It was not until noon that all the trainees in Camp 39 heard a rumor that Lin Sun was taken away by a spiritual tattooist in the camp, who wanted Lin Sun to do chores for that spiritual tattooist. This made many trainees sneer. They thought that Lin Sun's action was undoubtedly equal to giving up the training in the camp, which was no different from being eliminated in disgrace. Ning Ming couldn't help but frown when he heard this rumor. He couldn't wait to catch Lin Sun and torture him. Lin Sun was so cowardly. Was he really going to give up? Ning Ming was very annoyed and depressed in his heart. Lin Sun is really cunning. He knows that his score is always at the bottom every day, and it's hard to change the situation. So he takes the initiative to run away, so that we can't find a chance to deal with him. At lunch, Chi Kan, Shin Wenbin, and other trainees gathered together. Talking about the rumor about Lin Sun, one trainee couldn't help sneering. Cunning? I don't think so. He can't even stick to the training. At best, he's a coward clown. A pretty and reserved girl next to him said disdainfully. Her name was Wenming Xiao, and her score was among the best in the camp, only slightly weaker than that of Chi Kan. Yes, he is a clown. Many people burst into laughter. Only Shin Wenbin was extremely depressed. He said with a gloomy face, "Since he left, I can't find a chance to vent my anger. It's really hateful." Chi Kan smiled and said, "Don't worry. As long as Lin Sun is still in the bloodthirsty camp, there will be a chance for you to vent your anger. I don't believe that he can still hide in the monthly assessment 10 days later." The monthly assessment tested the overall score of a camp's trainees after a month's training, so as to screen out the fittest. At that time, in the 40 camps of the bloodthirsty camp, trainees in 2 camps would compete with each other. The outstanding trainees would stay, and the bottom trainees would be eliminated. At that time, the 40 camps would also be merged, with half of the trainees being cut off and the other half remaining. Therefore, for the trainees in the entire camp, no one dared to take the monthly assessment lightly in more than 10 days. It was worth mentioning that trainees who failed in the daily training would also be directly eliminated as before. In short, if a trainee wanted to stay in the bloodthirsty camp, he would be eliminated if he couldn't complete the daily training. After completing the training, he would still be eliminated if his score was at the bottom. Under such layers of screening, the trainees who could stay were naturally the elites of the elites and the geniuses of the geniuses. Well, I'll wait for the monthly assessment and see if the little bastard Lin Sun dares to show up. Shin Wenbin gnashed his teeth and said with resentment. On the other side of the canteen, Shiryu was eating slowly. After a while, he suddenly smiled as if he was talking to himself. This is definitely not Lin Sun's idea. Next to Shiryu, there was a cold-looking teenager named Li Qiu. His performance was extremely good, and he often ranked in the top 5 in the daily training. Why do you say that? Li Qiu asked. He was not interested in Lin Sun, but since Shiryu asked him, he naturally had to say yes. I know Lin Sun's character. He looks harmless on the outside, but his heart is as firm as a rock. Once he makes up his mind on something, he will try his best to do it. Shiryu pondered and said, "It's hard to change the will of this kind of person, and he won't take the initiative to retreat and admit defeat. If this rumor is true, it proves that Lin Sun didn't take the initiative to do this, but that spiritual tattooist took a fancy to Lin Sun's strength, so he took Lin Sun away." Li Qiu became a little interested and said, "You mean Lin Sun was forced to do this?" Shiryu smiled and said, "It may not be forced, but Lin Sun definitely didn't take the initiative to do this. I don't know what Lin Sun can do to make a spiritual tattooist take the initiative to take him away. This seems a little unusual." Li Qiu was surprised and said, "Child, sure, since you value this person so much, why don't you draw him over to your side?" Shiryu smiled and said nothing. Li Qiu immediately knew that Shiryu had his own idea, so he didn't ask further. But he was a little curious. If Lin Sun, who ranked at the bottom, was really as Shiryu said, he was really not a simple person. Prepare well. We trainees can't just watch Camp 39 lose to other camps in the monthly assessment. I, sure you, can't afford to lose such a person. A trace of disdain flashed in Shiryu's eyes. You can only win, you can't lose. You can only win, you can't lose. Li Qiu repeated it in his heart. His blood was boiling, and he was full of lofty sentiments. He liked this feeling. The afternoon was the theory course. All trainees didn't find that Drill Master Young Ku was missing, and it was the obese middle-aged man who led them to the class. At the same time, a cold voice sounded in the empty warehouse. Use more strength. You're not skillful enough. Be more ruthless. You're too slow. Can you be more like a man? Attack! 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 Lin Sun was being trained by Drill Master Young Ku alone, but it was not so much a training as a one-sided brutal beating. Again and again, he was hit out like a sandbag. He fell with stars before his eyes, a bloody nose, and a swollen face, and all his bones were about to be broken. On the contrary, Young Ku stood where she was from the beginning to the end. Her straight figure was like an unshakable, lonely mountain against the contrast of the imperial military uniform. In the distance, Young Man looked at Lin Sun with pity in her eyes, but her sexy lips were slightly raised. It was good to let this guy suffer more. At least he could become stronger quickly. As for old Mo, he was immersed in his own research and completely forgot himself. He didn't even bother to see how badly Lin Sun was beaten at the moment. P.S. The 5th update is here. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed, voted, and tipped. Thank you for supporting Goldfish on the first day of its release. Although there are more than 300 subscriptions, Goldfish will still release 5 updates tomorrow to thank everyone for their support. Chapter 121. For a whole hour, Lin Sun was brutally beaten. He was a little numb and couldn't feel the pain. This was individual training, and Young Ku didn't use her real skills. She just used some close combat skills to beat Lin Sun. Comparatively speaking, Xie Ji's fighting means were simple, direct, and rough, while Young Ku's fighting paid more attention to some unimaginable skills, which were mysterious, ruthless, and one-hit kill. Lin Sun seemed to be beaten down again and again, but it was in this cruel training that his understanding of fighting accelerated significantly. This was a harvest. The greater the cost, the greater the benefit. This was vividly reflected by Drill Master Young Ku's beating. Lin Sun used to think that the separating tendons and dislocating bone skill he summarized was very powerful. But when he really fought with Young Ku, who had a superb fighting level, he found that he was too naive before. But the more naive it was, the more Lin Sun's unyielding character was aroused. In the process of being abused for a whole hour, Lin Sun showed his tenacious and amazing perseverance and comprehension. Although he was knocked down every time, his fighting methods were obviously changing gradually. This change was noticed by Young Ku. She didn't say anything on the surface, but she felt a little strange in her heart. On the first day of the training, she was not optimistic about Lin Sun. Lin Sun's cultivation was too low. Compared with other trainees, his fighting means were not outstanding. Even if Lin Sun was not eliminated in the first day of training, Young Ku didn't think that Lin Sun had much possibility to counterattack. All this could be seen from this week's score. From the beginning to the end, Lin Sun was the last one in Camp 39. It was also last night when Young Man took Lin Sun away that attracted Young Ku's attention, especially when Shu Sanchi said that Lin Sun would assist old Mo in the transformation of Ziying battleship and would no longer participate in various training in Camp 39. Young Ku directly disagreed. No matter how bad Lin Sun was, he was Young Ku's trainee. How could he be taken away directly? Young Ku had planned to take Lin Sun away last night, but she changed her mind after hearing the conversation between Lin Sun and Young Man outside the warehouse. Why should Young Man train her trainees alone? Young Ku could also do these things. Therefore, there was this afternoon's one-on-one training, and this kind of one-on-one training would continue every afternoon. But Young Ku didn't expect that Lin's perseverance was so tenacious, and his comprehension of fighting was so terrifying. All these factors together unconsciously improved Young Ku's opinion of Lin. Perhaps this kid could really persevere till the end? Young decided to wait and see. Soon, an hour of close combat training was over. Young said, "I'll give you an hour to recover. After an hour, I'll take you to the No. 10 training ground." After saying that, she turned around and left. From the beginning to the end, she didn't pay attention to young man in the distance. Lying on the ground, Lin Sun gasped for breath. He was numb all over, and his eyes were dull. Only the battle scenes flashed in his mind. "If you're not dead, get up quickly. No one will pity you even if you lie on the ground." Young man walked over and looked at Lin Sun with her arms crossed. Her eyes were full of schadenfreude. Lin Sun's dull eyes gradually became bright, and he murmured, "I have a feeling that I can make a breakthrough in less than 3 days." Young man was in a daze. Looking at the young boy's swollen face and his spirited eyes, a touch of softness appeared on her face. After all, he was just a 13-year-old boy. Who would be willing to admit defeat at such a young age? Young man squatted down, took out a bottle of ointment, and applied it to the bruises all over Lin Sun's body. She said, "Why are you so eager to be stronger?" Lin Sun didn't refuse young man's kindness. He breathed out comfortably and said, "For a better survival." Such an understatement seemed to have touched young man's heartstrings. She didn't say anything more and applied the ointment for Lin Sun in silence. However, her action was obviously much gentler. An hour later, in the number 10 training ground, Lin Sun held a saber and fought with golden flame spiders. His movements were vigorous and neat, with a kind of soaring spirit. It was unknown where young man got the ointment, but it was surprisingly effective. The bruises all over Lin Sun's body were healed in just 1 hour. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to bear such high intensity and cruel training. On the mountain peak, Young watched all this in silence. She treats this boy very well. She even took out the black jade snow-melting ointment to help him recover his injuries. Fatty middle-aged walked over. She has a guilty conscience. Young said coldly, "Don't blame young man for what happened in those days. We were too young at that time, not much older than this boy. Why do you always bear a grudge for the mistakes you made at that time?" Fatty middle-aged said with a complex expression, "Once some mistakes are made, they're destined to be unforgiven." Speaking of this, Young frowned and said, "Fatty, why do you come to me?" Fatty middle-aged knew clearly that Young didn't want to mention this again. He sighed and said, "The rules of the monthly assessment have been fixed. Camp 39 will confront Camp 40. The loser will be dismissed from the camp." Young raised her eyebrows and said, "Is the drill master of Camp 40 Residual Wolf?" Fatty middle-aged nodded. "Yes, it's this treacherous and insidious guy. There are currently 39 trainees in his camp, and there are many powerful figures among them. In terms of the number of trainees, your Camp 39 is at a complete disadvantage." Young said indifferently, "The number of trainees is never the key to victory. I know this very well." But Fatty middle-aged said worriedly, "Young if your Camp 39 fails this time, not only the camp will be dismissed, but also you will retire from the position of drill master. You should know what it means." Young was silent for a moment. Looking at Lin Sun's sweating figure on the training ground, she said, "I have never been interested in leaving the bloodthirsty camp." Fatty middle-aged shook his head and said nothing. Until the night fell, Lin Sun was sent back to Old Mo's warehouse. As soon as he returned, he lay on the chair like a puddle of mud. He was too tired. This time, he had fought with the golden flame spider for more than an hour. Lin Sun was on the verge of collapse and almost passed out due to exhaustion. This almost abnormal training made Lin Sun feel indescribable exhaustion and numbness both physically and mentally. Young man prepared dinner. Lin Sun forced himself to keep up his spirits and gobbled up the food. "Boy, you can refine the new spiritual furnace tomorrow. You are really a genius. I have a hunch that as long as you do it according to your method, you will definitely succeed this time." Old Mo came to Lin Sun in high spirits, and his face was full of joy. Lin Sun answered absent-mindedly, "Old Mo, I can't help you when you refine the spiritual furnace. You have to rely on yourself." Old Mo was stunned. "You won't do it?" Lin Sun said helplessly, I am still a spiritual apprentice. How can I inscribe spiritual tattoo formations? Spiritual apprentice? Old Emo opened his eyes wide. Boy, you won't lie to me, will you? You can come up with such a genius method and draw so many complicated spiritual tattoo formations. How can you say that you are a spiritual apprentice? Lin Sun sighed. Do I need to belittle myself? Old Emo was in a daze. Suddenly, he screamed and pointed at his nose. If you are a spiritual apprentice, I am not even as good as a spiritual apprentice, am I? Lin Sun didn't want to talk anymore. This old man was too competitive. Old Emo looked at Lin Sun as if he was looking at a monster, and suddenly said, With your means, you can totally concentrate on the road of a spiritual tattooist. You will definitely have endless wealth and a respected status in the future. Why do you come to the bloodthirsty camp for training? Lin Sun asked in reply, What about you? Why do you stay in the bloodthirsty camp? Old Mo's expression suddenly became a little complicated, and he said with a little irritation, I offended an old bastard and was forced to come here. I am different from you. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes. Old Mo's position in the bloodthirsty camp was extremely high. How could such a person be forced to hide here? So which big shot did he offend? After a while, Lin Sun said, I am indeed different from you. My purpose of coming to the bloodthirsty camp is very simple. I hope that one day I won't be forced to be like you. This answer seemed to be a little disrespectful to Old Emo, but Old Emo seemed to understand it at once. He sighed, If I had the same awareness as you, I wouldn't be reduced to such a situation today. As he spoke, he turned around and left with his hands clasped behind his back. His skinny figure was a little bleak and lonely. Who on earth did Old Emo offend? Lin Sun couldn't help asking young man, a grandmaster of spiritual tattoos with a high position in the empire. Young man answered casually, as if it was not a secret. A grandmaster of spiritual tattoos. Lin Sun was shocked. He was even more superior than a grandmaster of spiritual tattoos. No wonder Old Emo could only be forced to hide here. Offending a grandmaster of spiritual tattoos was more serious than offending a strongman of Tao Insight Realm. From this day on, Lin Sun's life became extremely regular, but also extremely hard and abnormal. In the morning, he discussed the spiritual tattoo formation with Old Emo and put forward his own suggestions on the transformation of the spiritual furnace of Ziying Battleship. In the afternoon, he would carry out all kinds of cruel training with young Ku alone. Even at night, he had to meditate and practice, hone his spirit, and figure out martial arts. Under such high-intensity operation, Lin Sun wished he could divide the time into two halves. 3 days later, Lin Sun's cultivation smoothly broke through to the 7th level of martial realm, Zaya's Hushin. This time, the strength of his whole body underwent a new transformation. Only in terms of the thickness of his spiritual energy, he was comparable to a strong man at the peak of the 9th level of martial realm. When seeing the test result, young man couldn't help but be moved. She stared at Lin Sun and said, You are really a monster who doesn't play by the rules. I even doubt whether there is a talent attribute in your body that hasn't been awakened yet. Chapter 122. In the following days, Lin Sun's life went on step by step between being abused and becoming stronger. Young Ku's individual training, the continuous supply of condensate pills, and Lin Sun's own unremitting efforts made Lin Sun undergo a significant transformation in a very short time. His cultivation broke through and reached the small circulation realm, the 7th level of martial realm. The spiritual energy in his body was so vigorous that it could be compared with that of a practitioner at the peak of the 9th level of martial realm. In terms of the quality of spiritual energy, it was even better. Marching boxing broke through and reached the mastery of martial Tao. Although it was a basic punching method, when it reached the mastery, the power of each move had been completely reborn and was extremely powerful. The most important thing was that Lin Sun found his own punching style through marching boxing, which was solemn and majestic, like a vast sea swallowing a great abyss. His spirit broke through, and the third soul star was lit in his sea of consciousness. He allowed the range of his perception to expand to a radius of 300 m, and even the slightest movement in the grass wouldn't be able to escape his eyes and ears. According to Young Man, Lin Sun's physical strength was no weaker than that of a practitioner at the 8th level of martial realm. In terms of body refining cultivation, it was called metallographic jade, which meant that the body was as precious as gold and as flawless as a fine jade. In terms of combat experience, Lin Sun could be said to have experienced hundreds of battles. Not only did he gain a lot of insights and experiences from the fight with a super strong practitioner like Young Ku, but in the actual combat, these insights and experiences all became a part of Lin Sun's combat effectiveness. All these changes made Lin Sun more immersed in cultivation. Even though he was still abused by Young Ku every day, the progress he got was enough to make up for all these. Lin Sun enjoyed the feeling of becoming stronger so much that he even forgot the passage of time and how many points he had earned now. Old Mo was not idle either. He tinkered with various spiritual tattoos every day and constantly adjusted and modified the spiritual furnace. He seemed to be in a state of ecstasy. Comparatively speaking, Young Man was much more leisurely. In addition to applying medicine for Lin Sun's wounds every day, she prepared meals and occasionally gave Lin Sun some tips on fighting and cultivation. As time went on, the atmosphere in Camp 39 became more and more intense. All trainees were preparing for the monthly assessment. In addition to training, they spent almost all their time improving themselves. The monthly assessment wasn't just a matter of being eliminated. It was a matter of everyone's honor. They were all youths, full of vigor and pride. They were resourceful and shrewd, and their backgrounds were not simple. Naturally, they could not tolerate being suppressed by students from other camps in the monthly assessment. In other words, this monthly assessment was related to the honor of the entire Camp 39. Once they failed, even their camp would be laid off. Even if they could stay and continue training, they could only be assigned to other camps as failures. This was undoubtedly a great humiliation for those proud young students. It was worth mentioning that when there were only 3 days left before the monthly assessment, there were only 24 people left in Camp 39, including Lin Sun. In other words, during this period of training, there were 4 people who failed the training and were once again eliminated. Young Man's requirements were harsh and cruel. In the opinion of the obese middle-aged man, Young Man's requirements are the highest and harshest among the 40 camps. The result of all this was that the elimination rate of Camp 39 had always been the first, and the number of trainees left was the smallest among the 40 camps. This was very dangerous. At least for the confrontation between camps, a small number of trainees was bound to be at a disadvantage. The obese middle-aged man had reminded Young Ku, but Young could never change her attitude, which made everyone feel helpless. As for all trainees in Camp 39, although they had some doubts about this, no one dared to question Drill Master Young could due to their fear and awe. But in this way, they were all under great pressure. The key of the monthly assessment was the confrontation between camps. The smaller the number of trainees, the greater the loss. There were only 3 days left before the reading assessment. Lin Sun's life was still the same as before. There was no change because of the upcoming assessment. But when he was healing his injuries at night, Lin Sun suddenly realized a problem. Almost all trainees in Bloodthirsty Camp had reached the 9th level of Martial Realm, and each of them had extraordinary aptitude and amazing potential. Why hadn't anyone chosen a break through to Gang Spirit Realm? Hearing Lin's doubts, Young Man couldn't help but feel a little surprised. Didn't anyone tell you before you came to Bloodthirsty Camp? Lin Sun was at a loss. He was sent here by accident. How could he know this? Soon, Young Man gave the answer. The reason why they suppress their realms is to prepare for entering the gang-producing lake 1 year later. In other words, on the one hand, they come to the Bloodthirsty Camp for the cruelest hellish training to refine themselves, but on the other hand, their ultimate goal is to open up the most perfect pond of spiritual power in their ocean of chi when they break through the gang spirit realm. After a pause, she continued, the existence of gang-producing lake can help them realize all this. Hearing this, Lin Sun's heart was in turmoil. Gang spirit realm, a brand new cultivation realm, was beyond the martial realm and was known as the beginning of the road of cultivation. In this realm, a pond of spiritual power would be opened up in the sea of chi in the practitioner's body. The spiritual energy in the practitioner's body would be transformed through the pond of spiritual power, and then the spiritual energy could be refined into the real Gang Chi. Gang Spirit Realm was divided into 3 small realms, namely Human Gang Realm, Earth Gang Realm, and Heaven Gang Realm. No matter which realm it was, the pond of spiritual power was always its core. The pond of spiritual power was also divided into 3 grades according to its quality. The first grade was the best, and the third grade was the worst. Most of the overmatches in Gang Spirit Realm in the world opened up 3rd grade pond of spiritual power, so they were called ordinary overmatches in Gang Spirit Realm. However, not everyone could have the pond of spiritual power of the 1st and 2nd class, which was related to the cultivator's talent, root, and cultivation foundation. It was difficult for a cultivator to have a pond of spiritual power of this class unless he was an outstanding cultivator. Even to open up the 1st grade pond of spiritual power, in addition to one's own advantages, one also needed a certain chance. Every trainee in the Bloodthirsty camp had a remarkable background and excellent aptitude. The reason why they used all kinds of means to enter the Bloodthirsty camp was to open up the perfect pond of spiritual power in their bodies when they reached Gang Spirit Realm, in addition to perfecting themselves. The gang-producing lake in the Bloodthirsty camp was a chance that could realize their wish. Therefore, no matter who it was, they couldn't bear to be eliminated, because it was equal to losing the chance to enter the gang-producing lake. Without the help of the gang-producing lake, the pond of spiritual power they opened up would inevitably be much weaker when they advanced to Gang Spirit Realm. Of course, the gang-producing lake was not the only chance in the world, but for all trainees, the Bloodthirsty camp was a chance that they could touch. Understanding all this, Lin Sun couldn't help sighing with emotion. No wonder Ning Ming suppressed his cultivation for 4 years. It turned out that he came here for the gang-producing lake in the Bloodthirsty camp. The reason why other trainees on the 9th level of Martial Realm didn't choose to break through was probably the same. Handsome boy, now you understand the importance of the Bloodthirsty camp. Now you're only on the 7th level of Martial Realm. Try to reach the 9th level of Martial Realm within a year. By then, you can enter the gang-producing lake, which is enough for you to be reborn when you advance to Gang Spirit Realm. Young man reminded Lin Sun with a smile, her eyes twinkling. Lin Sun thought for a while and said, "If possible, I certainly hope to reach this step, but before that, it's imperative to strive not to be eliminated." Young man praised, "You're smart. There are 1,000 trainees in the Bloodthirsty camp this time. So far, more than 100 trainees have been eliminated. It's only been less than a month. You can imagine how many trainees will stay after a year of elimination." That was exactly what Lin Sun was thinking about. There was no other way. The elimination rate of the Bloodthirsty camp was so high that he didn't dare to think too much about whether he could enter the gang-producing lake or not. Young man recalled, "I remember that in the past, there were no more than 30 trainees who could persist to the end and enter the gang-producing lake in each training of the Bloodthirsty camp." Lin Sun was shocked again and said in surprise, 30? Are the other 900 trainees all eliminated? Young man said with a hint of disdain, "Do you think that anyone can enter the gang-producing lake at will? It's a big chance. In the whole Xiao Empire, there are only a few places with such a chance. It seems that I made the right choice to come here this time." Lin Sun was excited. The more challenging something was, the more it could stimulate one's fighting spirit. The day before the monthly assessment began, Lin Sun left Old Mo's warehouse and returned to Camp 39 with Young Ko. The monthly assessment would begin tomorrow. As a member of Camp 39, Lin Sun naturally had to participate in it. Before leaving the warehouse, Old Mo proudly patted his thin chest and promised, "Boy, don't hesitate to fight. Even if you're beaten down by others, I promise that you won't be sent out of the Bloodthirsty camp." However, when Lin Sun asked if he could guarantee that he could enter the gang-producing lake, Old Mo immediately became discouraged and left with an excuse. Obviously, although Old Mo dared to guarantee that he could keep Lin Sun, he could only do this whether Lin could enter the gang-producing lake or not depended on himself. Young man was full of confidence in Lin Sun. She proudly crossed her arms in front of her bulging chest, showing her thrilling figure vividly and vividly. She blinked her eyes and smiled charmingly. Don't be too eye-catching. Try to keep a low profile. If Drillmaster Young likes you, my heart will be broken. Chapter 123. At noon, in the canteen, a group of trainees of Camp 39 were eating by themselves and talking eagerly about the monthly assessment that would begin tomorrow. I heard that our opponent this time is Camp 40. There's still 39 people on their side, while there are only 24 people on our side, including the coward Lin Sun. In tomorrow's confrontation, we are at an absolute disadvantage only in terms of number. Someone sighed and frowned. Humph, no matter how many people there are, it's useless if they can't fight. I vaguely remember that there seems to be no master in Camp 40. Some people were disdainful and didn't take it seriously. You can't say that. Lei Xinyue, Di Jun, Gong Ming, and others in Camp 40 are not easy to deal with. I think only top figures like Qi Can, Shi Yu, and Ning Ming can suppress them in our camp. Someone muttered with a look of knowing oneself and knowing the enemy. On the other side, Shi Yu was also analyzing. Lei Xinyue is the granddaughter of Lei Yaoting, one of the few strong practitioners in Tao Insight realm in the Empire. She has been practicing the sword scripture of Gang Thunder passed down by the ancestors of Lei family since she was a child. Her strength is definitely not weak. If you meet her, you should adopt a roundabout strategy. Avoid fighting with her, frustrate her spirit, and take your time. Li Qiu next to him nodded secretly. These were extremely important news, and only people like Shi Yu could get such first-hand information. Shi Yu continued, and Di Jun is also a ruthless character with a sword. The power of the melody of 10,000 swords he has practiced is incredible, but you don't have to worry too much. The melody of 10,000 swords can only exert its real power in the hands of the strong practitioners in Sea Spirit Realm. Li Qiu silently remembered that in tomorrow's monthly assessment, no one knew what kind of opponent he would meet, so it was absolutely necessary to make full preparation. As for Gong Ming, Shi Yu frowned and said, "This guy has practiced the 9 Ghost Dom body protection cudgel. He not only has amazing physical strength, but also has a long breath and first-class defense. It's really a headache to defeat him." Li Qiu also seemed to know Gong Ming and sneered. The Gong family is called the Tumbler family in the Empire, which means that no one can defeat them. But in my opinion, they're a group of turtles hiding in their shells. They are too conservative. But Shi Yu looked serious and said, "This kind of person is the most important one. My father once said that the people of the Gong family know the wisdom of keeping a low profile. No one can deal with them. As an outstanding descendant of the Gong family, Gong Ming is by no means simple." Li Qiu's expression suddenly became serious. He had noticed that compared with Lei Xinyue and Di Jun, Shi Yu paid more attention to Gong Ming. While they were talking, someone beside them suddenly shouted, "Ha ha ha ha! Look who's here. Isn't this the coward Lin Sun?" The voice was full of ridicule. Lin's face, all of them, they saw of them, and Lin, they of them of, and of Lin by Lin, by they saw of, and of Lin of the scene, of Lin of Lin of, and by. These rumors were inseparable from the words of coward and clown, which were full of disdain and humiliation. All of a sudden, many people's faces became strange, and there was a buzz of discussion. This guy finally dares to stand out. It's rare. Humph, I think he is forced. Tomorrow is the monthly assessment. It's impossible for him to avoid it. Well, let's not talk about this clown. We don't expect him to play any role in tomorrow's monthly assessment. He is doomed to be eliminated. On the other side, Shin Wenbin was excited. He gnashed his teeth and said, "The little bastard finally comes out. This time, I'd like to see how badly he will be beaten in tomorrow's monthly assessment. Cheekin couldn't help laughing. He didn't even bother to regard Lin as an enemy. A coward clown like him was not worthy to be his enemy. Child, you were right. He really appeared. He must also participate in the monthly assessment. Li Xiao in the distance was thoughtful. Ho ho, I'm looking forward to it. Sure, you smiled thoughtfully. In the face of these comments and gazes, Lin seemed to be unaware of them. Soon he fixed his eyes on Ning Meng, walked straight over, sat opposite him, and said with a little surprise, "Hey, why do I find that you don't seem to want to see me?" At this moment, Ning Meng's face was gloomy. He buried his head in eating and didn't look at Lin Sun from beginning to end, which was a bit abnormal. Lin Sun thought for a while and suddenly smiled. Without saying anything more, he took his own meal and began to enjoy it. Lin Sun hadn't appeared for nearly 3 weeks. When he saw the familiar faces and the lively atmosphere in the canteen, Lin Sun felt as if he had been away for a lifetime. In fact, he preferred the atmosphere in Old Mo's warehouse, where he only needed to practice and train and didn't need to care about anything else. Seeing Lin Sun was silent, Ning Meng seemed to be unable to hold it anymore. He suddenly raised his head and glared at Lin Sun. "You coward! How dare you show up?" Lin Sun said with a smile. "Who told you that I am a coward?" Seeing that Lin Sun was not ashamed but calm, Ning Meng's accumulated disappointment and anger broke out completely. "How dare you deny it? Nowadays, everyone knows that you are afraid of being eliminated, so you follow a damn spiritual tattooist to do odd jobs. How could I, Ning Meng, recognize you as a friend? You are hopeless." His loud voice attracted the attention of many trainees nearby. But when they saw this scene, Qi Kan, Xin Wenbin, Wen Mingxiu, and other trainees in the same circle couldn't help but gloat. In the past, Ning Meng and Lin Sun had a good relationship, but now he was completely angry because of Lin Sun's cowardice, which made them despise Lin Sun more and more. What did it mean to be deserted by all? That was it. Lin Sun was stunned. He didn't expect that Ning Meng would be so angry. After a while, he said seriously, "As a friend, I just want to tell you that the rumors you heard are false." "False?" Ning Meng was stunned, and his face was still gloomy. "But why didn't you tell me? I exchanged 10 bottles of condensate pills with my points at that time, which were all prepared for you. I didn't expect that you would leave without saying goodbye. You should be cut into pieces." Lin Sun felt warm in his heart. He finally realized that the reason why Ning Meng was so angry was that he really regarded Lin Sun as a friend. If it were others who would take Lin Sun seriously like Ning Meng. "Let's not talk about this. I will tell you everything after the monthly assessment." Lin Sun thought for a while and said seriously. Ning Meng frowned. "Why wait until then?" Lin Sun suddenly smiled, glanced around intentionally or unintentionally, and lowered his voice. "Because I have to vent my anger first." In the end, there was a touch of coldness in his voice. He couldn't ignore those ridicule and disdain, and he was not so magnanimous to swallow it. Ning Meng was shocked. He stared at Lin Sun for a moment, and then said in a muffled voice, "Then I'll wait for your explanation." Lin Sun nodded with a smile. But what Lin Sun didn't expect was that the opportunity to vent his anger came so soon. After lunch, most of the trainees of other camps had left and no longer trained. Because the monthly assessment would be held tomorrow, it would be very disadvantageous for them to be injured during training at this time. But Lin Sun and other trainees of Camp 39 didn't relax because of this. They were directly taken into the fighting field by young Ku and planned to train as usual. This made many people confused. They felt that young Ku's training attitude was too harsh. The monthly assessment would be held tomorrow. What was the use of training at this time except for getting injured? Young Ku's words made everyone speechless. The training of Bloodthirsty Camp will be carried out for a year, which means that there will be 12 monthly assessments. Tomorrow is just the first assessment. Is it necessary to be so nervous? What else could they say? But it was inevitable that they were depressed. Their opponents tomorrow were a group of trainees of Camp 40. They were originally at a disadvantage in number. If they didn't pay attention to it, they would be completely finished. But young Ku's next words swept away their depression. I've specially prepared the black jade snow-melting ointment for you. I won't let you participate in the assessment with injuries tomorrow. Many people found that Drill Master Young Ku seemed to be ruthless, but in fact she had a sense of propriety. She was not always strict and harsh. When they entered the fighting field, many trainees became excited. It was a training before the assessment. Who dared to do this in other camps? Young people especially loved face and had strong self-esteem. What they liked most was this kind of unconventional routine. The more they behaved like this, the more face they would feel. Especially Shin Wenbin. He was more than excited at this moment. He was so excited as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He had been thinking in his heart that he must draw the little bastard Lin Sun. If he could teach this fellow a lesson before the monthly assessment and vent his anger, that would be for the best. Perhaps it was God's blessing that he was incredibly lucky when he drew lots to choose his opponent. It was like he hit the jackpot and drew Lin Sun. Ha ha, 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 ha. Shin Wenbin laughed with a complacent face. God also helped him. When Chi Kan and others learned all this, they couldn't help showing a strange look. Lin Sun was really unlucky. He hid for 3 weeks and didn't show up. As a result, he ran into Shin Wenbin as soon as he showed up. They were very clear that Shin Wenbin just broke through to the 9th level of martial realm last week. Compared with the time when he just entered the training camp, his fighting capacity had undergone a new transformation. As for Lin Sun, he gave up training as early as 3 weeks ago and followed a spiritual tattooist to do odd jobs. How could he be a match for Shin Wenbin under such circumstances? It was a pity that they didn't know how Lin Sun lived in the past 3 weeks. Otherwise, they might regret their thoughts and opinions at this time. Is Shin Wenbin stupid? Lin Sun smiled calmly. Don't care about others. Can you do it? Ning Meng was anxious for Lin Sun. He also thought that Lin Sun just did odd jobs in the past 3 weeks and neglected his cultivation. How could he be a match for Shin Wenbin, who had just broken through to the 9th level of martial realm? Whether he is stupid or not, you will know after the battle. At this time, when Sure You passed by Lin Sun, he suddenly whispered with a smile. Chapter 124. In the fighting field. The layout here was quite unique. The huge field was divided into 30 independent arenas, and each arena was only 30 meters in radius. This arrangement was also to fully exercise the ability of the trainees to fight in close combat. In a real battle, sometimes there was no way to retreat at all, and there was no enough space to dodge. It was a head-on fight in a small space. In this kind of fight, if the two sides were similar in fighting capacity, the test was often more on fighting skills and a fierce head-on attack. Therefore, each arena was only 30 meters in radius. Once the figure left the arena, it meant failure. As usual, after the trainees of Camp 39 entered the fighting field, they went to the corresponding arenas by drawing lots and began to practice fighting. Different from the past, this time many trainees more or less focused on the number 13 arena in the center. Many people's eyes were full of ridicule, as if they were watching the fun. Only Ning Meng frowned, with a touch of worry in his heart. On the arena, Lin Sun stood alone. After 3 weeks, he became much taller, well-proportioned, and slender. His delicate face was angular, his nose was straight, and his eyes were deep. Compared with the past, he looked more elegant and outstanding. Lin Sun's appearance was originally very good-looking. With the growth of age and the tempering of these days, he looked like a handsome young man. This scene made the eyes of many female trainees slightly brighten. It seemed that for the first time, they found that the rumored coward teenager was also very handsome. In fact, Lin Sun sometimes felt strange. The more others trained, the fiercer they became, but the more he trained, the more elegant he became. From the appearance alone, he seemed to be harmless, handsome, and warm. Little bastard, I've been waiting for you for a long time. On the opposite side, Shin Wenbin smiled coldly, with tyranny in his eyes. He had been holding a grudge since he suffered a loss in Lin Sun's hands on the first day of training. Seeing Lin Sun jumped out himself today, Shin Wenbin couldn't bear the hatred in his heart. Especially today, he was lucky to draw Lin Sun as his opponent, which made Shin Wenbin feel that God was helping him. At this time, if he didn't torture Lin Sun severely, he would feel sorry for God's favor. Maggot. Lin Sun spat out a word from his lips with a smile. You? Shin Wenbin was stunned and suddenly remembered that on the first day of training, Lin Sun had humiliated him with maggots that ate feces every day. This made Shin Wenbin's long-suppressed anger burst out at once, and his face became ferocious. Die! His figure flashed like a raging fire, and his palms and fingers were like sharp blades, cutting towards Lin Sun's throat. Rumble! The air exploded. It could be clearly seen that Shin Wenbin was covered with raging flames, and his hands were like a pair of flaming knives, producing scorching and terrible spiritual power fluctuations. Chaotic Flame, Cloud Saber. This was Shin Wenbin's family heirloom combat skill. Although there was a word blade in its name, it was an extremely powerful palm technique. When it was practiced to a high level, it was like a fire burning the sky and clouds splashing. Its power was extremely terrible. In the distance, Chikin couldn't help but nod in his heart. Shin Wenbin seemed to be a little violent and domineering, but his fighting capacity and talent were extremely outstanding. Now that he had reached the 9th level of martial realm, it was a piece of cake for him to deal with Lin Sun, who was at the 6th level of martial realm. Most of the others had the same idea as Chi Can. Seeing this, they couldn't help but want to see how badly Lin Sun would be tortured. Only Ning Meng frowned more and more, and his heart tightened. Shin Wenbin's current fighting capacity could roughly rank in the middle level of Camp 39, not the top, but definitely not low. As for Lin Sun, he had given up training 3 weeks ago, and his ranking had been at the bottom. How should he deal with Shin Wenbin? It was worth mentioning that although many people in the field were paying attention to the duel between Lin Sun and Shin Wenbin, they were also fighting in the arena. At this time, because of his carelessness, Ning Meng was almost punched in the head by his opponent on the arena. His face suddenly changed, and with a roar, he rushed out like a raging dragon and slapped his opponent's face, making him scream and fall out of the arena. His opponent was Yi Xiaowu, who belonged to the same circle as Chi Can and Shin Wenbin. Perhaps Ning Meng was worried that Lin Sun might be tortured by Shin Wenbin, so he vented his anger on Yi Xiaowu. As soon as he attacked, Yi Xiaowu was seriously injured and had to leave the arena. Ning Meng vented his anger a little. At the same time, there was a sudden exclamation in the field. Ning Meng's heart sank. Was Lin Sun defeated? He turned his head and saw that Lin Sun was still standing in the same place, but Shin Wenbin was gone, which made Ning Meng stunned. When he finally saw Shin Wenbin's figure, he couldn't help but be stunned again. Shin Wenbin fell to the ground at the moment, and the left half of his face was red and swollen like a pig's head, which made him look extremely embarrassed. What just happened? Ning Meng was dumbfounded. He just hit Yi Xiaowu away with only one move, and the whole process was just a matter of a few seconds. But in just a few seconds, Lin Sun had also won the battle, and it was not him who fell down, but Shin Wenbin. Ning Meng felt a little confused. What the hell is going on? At this moment, not only Ning Meng, but also other trainees present looked like they had seen a ghost. Many of them were defeated by their opponents in the arena because of a slight flaw in their mind. How could this happen? In the distance, Chi Can's eyes flickered. When Ming Xiu, Mao Langshan, and others in the same circle with them were also a little surprised. Shin Wenbin's attack was so powerful that people thought Lin Sun couldn't resist it and was doomed to be beaten down. Unexpectedly, in the face of this attack, Lin Sun didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped forward and easily broke Shin Wenbin's defense with the most common move of marching boxing, White Dragon Armor removal. Shin Wenbin's left face was hit and flew out of the arena with a scream. All this happened almost in a breath. It was so fast that people almost thought they were dazzled. But when it was confirmed that all this was true, many people couldn't help changing their expressions and looking at Lin Sun in a slightly different way. It seemed that Lin Sun's cultivation had also advanced, but it was absolutely impossible for him to surpass the 8th level of martial realm. But why was his combat effectiveness so strong? No one knew. Standing at the door of the fighting field, Young Kus saw all this with a calm look. She really didn't feel strange about all this. If Lin Sun couldn't do it, she would have wasted 3 weeks of training with him alone. Damn it! Shin Wenbin roared and rushed to the arena again. His left face was red and swollen, but he was not seriously injured. But he couldn't accept the fact that he was beaten up by Lin Sun with only one blow, and it was hit on his face in public. This made Shin Wenbin full of shame and violence, and his eyes were red. He absolutely didn't believe that Lin Sun was so strong. It must be because of his negligence that Lin Sun found his flaws. Yes, it must be so. Shin Wenbin comforted himself, roared, and rushed up again. Every time a participant failed in the fighting field, 1 point would be deducted, and the winner could get 1 point. Unless he was seriously injured and couldn't fight, he was not allowed to quit the training. If he admitted defeat, he would be eliminated. Boom! At this moment, Shin Wenbin's body seemed to be burning with a bright glow, and his palms and fingers were emitting a terrible hot breath. He was like a fire god of war, with terrible power. In the distance, Ning Ming concentrated his attention and refused to miss any details. Many people in the field also had the same idea. They still couldn't imagine how Lin Sun defeated Shin Wenbin with one move. How could a guy who had given up training 3 weeks ago, who was defined as a clown and a coward by most people, have such a fighting capacity? Everyone wanted to have a further look. On the arena, Lin Sun didn't avoid or take a detour. He still took the initiative to step forward and waved his fist. Marching boxing, fierce tiger out of the mountain. It was a simple punch, and everyone present was familiar with this move. But under such a punch, the violent Shin Wenbin was once again sent flying. This time, he was hit on his right face, and his teeth fell off with blood. With a scream, he fell out of the arena again. The audience was silent. They were all shocked by this scene. The most basic marching boxing once again defeated Shin Wenbin, who had the secret skill flaming cloud-shaped saber passed down in his family. It was too horrible. People finally realized that their previous guesses and definitions about Lin Sun seemed to be wrong, totally wrong. Lin Sun didn't give up training on his own initiative, nor was he a coward and a clown. It was obvious that his fighting capacity had improved by leaps and bounds during the 3 weeks he left. This made many people's faces a little gloomy, especially the trainees in the same circle as Qi Kan, Wen Mingxiu, and Mao Langshan, whose faces were very interesting at the moment. Originally, they planned to see Lin Sun make a fool of himself. Unexpectedly, the reality gave them a hard slap in the face, making them look like a group of clowns at this moment, which was particularly ridiculous. Marching boxing is not terrible. What is terrible is marching boxing that has reached the mastery of martial Tao. Lin Sun's progress in the past 3 weeks is not slower than that of anyone present, Shiryu murmured in his heart. Lin Sun's performance further proved his view in his heart. A person like Lin Sun was absolutely not simple. What was ridiculous was that Shin Wenbin thought he could show off his strength after he reached the 9th level of martial realm. It was not a loss for him to be beaten. Fuck, this guy is pretending to be a pig to eat the tiger. Ning Ming completely understood. He was excited, but he couldn't help sighing with emotion in his heart. Lin Sun was so insidious. The reason why he didn't say anything before was that he was waiting for this moment to give his opponent a hard blow. This guy was so bad. Thinking of this, Ning Ming couldn't help laughing. How to put it? Although Lin Sun's method was insidious, it suited his taste very much. Chapter 125. It was impossible. Shin Wenbin was so angry that he was about to go crazy. In the past 3 weeks of training, he spent almost all his time and energy. Relying on his excellent aptitude, he successfully broke through to the 9th level of martial realm. He thought that he could defeat Lin Sun, a practitioner on the 6th level of martial realm, under such circumstances. How could he expect that such a thing would happen? What made Shin Wenbin feel especially humiliated was that he, a practitioner on the 9th level of martial realm, a descendant of the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Guards of the Forbidden City, who had mastered the unique skills of his family, was defeated twice in a row under the watchful eyes of the public. His opponent was only on the 7th level of martial realm at best, and his background was far less than his. Even the fighting skills he used were just the most widely circulated basic boxing, marching boxing. Shin Wenbin could not tolerate being defeated by such a person. With a roar, he rushed to the arena again. This time, he became more cautious and chose both offensive and defensive tactics instead of rushing around. However, he was defeated again. With another punch, Shin Wenbin felt as if he was hit by a mountain. He flew out of the arena and fell on his face. Many people even felt sorry for Shin Wenbin. The process of his defeat was no different from being completely crushed and ravaged. The strong fighting capacity Lin Sun showed also aroused many people's fear and sidelong attention. At this time, no one dared to regard him as a coward. With the cultivation of the 7th level of martial realm and the most basic marching boxing, Lin Sun could defeat Shin Wenbin. Was this something ordinary people could do? Ningmeng was not worried about Lin Sun anymore. He finally understood that Lin Sun's sudden departure 3 weeks ago was not because he gave up training, but to improve himself. Otherwise, he was doomed to be eliminated if he didn't make any changes, as he was at the bottom of the camp at that time. It was also at this time that Ningmeng's displeasure and grudge against Lin Sun completely disappeared. Shin Wenbin was defeated 3 times in a row, so there was no suspense in this training. Many people couldn't bear to see him being ravaged like this, so they withdrew their gazes and began to concentrate on their own fighting training. After these consecutive defeats, Shin Wenbin seemed to wake up from his anger and humiliation. He had completely realized how terrible Lin Sun was. Even if he was unwilling, he had no choice but to admit that even if he charged into the arena again, it was bound to be impossible for him to turn the situation around. Shin Wenbin was not stupid, otherwise he would not be sent to the bloodthirsty camp. However, what made him feel bitter in his mouth was that he had no choice but to bite the bullet and step into the ring again, because he had not fainted from his serious injuries. According to the training rules, he could not admit defeat at the last minute, because admitting defeat would mean elimination. Damn it! Damn it! Facing such a situation, Shin Wenbin wanted to cry, but had no tears. He had thought that the result of the draw was very good, and it was God's help. But now it seemed that it was a trap that had been dug long ago. He hated himself for jumping into it stupidly. Now, it was too late to regret. At the thought that he would be defeated by Lin Sun in an absolute manner again and again, Shin Wenbin almost fainted. At least he didn't have to participate in the training anymore. Unfortunately, no one knew whether it was intentional or not. Although Lin defeated Shin Wenbin with 1 blow 3 times, he had a good sense of propriety, so that Shin Wenbin was not seriously injured, which was not enough to make him fall into a coma. Did Lin Sun hold back because of fear? Obviously not. Shin Wenbin also realized this problem. He could even be sure that Lin Sun did it on purpose in order to beat him over and over again in the ring. Not only that, as he was defeated again and again, Lin Sun could earn points again and again. When Shin Wenbin thought of this, he trembled with anger and was so aggrieved that he was about to explode. This little bastard was so insidious, despicable, and shameless. Child Shin, there are 3 seconds left. If you don't come up, you may be eliminated. I think your parents and relatives will be very sad if they know this. On the ring, Lin Sun said with a warm smile, as if he was reminding Shin Wenbin with good intentions. But in Shin Wenbin's eyes, he was so angry that he couldn't wait to chop Lin Sun's hateful, smiling face with a knife. In the end, he had no choice but to step onto the ring. He made up his mind that he would choose to defend this time. The longer he delayed, the more advantageous it would be for him, and he could reduce the deduction of points as much as possible. Therefore, as soon as Shin Wenbin stepped onto the ring, he was very vigilant. Without the tyrannical and wild attitude just now, he seemed to have become another person who was afraid of everything. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help laughing, but he would not let this guy get what he wanted. Boom! Lin Sun took the initiative to attack without any delay. He stepped on the ground and rushed to Shin Wenbin like an arrow leaving the bow. The spiritual energy in Lin Sun's body surged, and the quality of his whole person changed abruptly. He was like an unsheathed, peerless sword, showing off his sharpness. In the past 3 weeks, Lin Sun was beaten by young Ku every day. No matter how generous he was, this feeling of being abused was always depressing. At this time, the depression accumulated in the bottom of Lin Sun's heart was completely released on Shin Wenbin, the unlucky guy, as if he had found an outlet to vent. Seeing Lin Sun's momentum, Shin Wenbin's scalp was numb. He was full of hatred, anger, and grievance. Like a resentful widow, his expression was very ugly. Boom! A moment later, Shin Wenbin was blown away. His miserable scream pierced the air, which made all the trainees in the fighting field tremble. They didn't need to look back to know that Shin Wenbin must be very miserable at this moment. However, Shin Wenbin's injury was really not serious. He just lost a few teeth, his face became redder and swollen, and his hair was a little disheveled. Of course, this was Lin Sun's intention. For a guy like Shin Wenbin, even if Lin Sun didn't beat him, he would hate him for a lifetime. In this case, Lin Sun would not let him off so easily. Lin Sun not only wanted to make Shin Wenbin suffer, but also wanted to plunder all the points he had earned. Only in this way could other trainees remember that if they wanted to be Lin Sun's enemy, they should consider whether they could bear Lin Sun's revenge first. This was to establish his prestige. The competition in the bloodthirsty camp was very cruel. Only by choosing the right time to show his fangs could those potential opponents be afraid of him and not dare to provoke him easily. For Shin Wenbin, the training time of this fighting course was particularly long. Every minute and every second made his heart and body suffer. He failed again and again and had to go to the arena again and again. Who could understand his helplessness and grievance? In the past, Shin Wenbin was best at abusing others, but today he finally deeply understood what it meant to be abused. It was so tragic that he wanted to die. Lin Sun, one day, I will pay back 10 times for what I have suffered today. I swear, I will make you wish you were dead. Shin Wenbin shouted in his heart. He hated Lin Sun so much that he went crazy. At the same time, Lin Sun was thinking that he should find a chance to kill Shin Wenbin as much as possible in the future. Otherwise, he was bound to be a trouble in the future. As time went by, after Shin Wenbin was defeated for at least 17 or 18 times, someone finally couldn't bear it anymore. In the distance, Chi Kan knocked out his opponent with a sudden blow. Then he turned around and laughed. Lin Sun, you must be bored. Why don't we have a practice? He seemed to be laughing, but his eyes were cold when he looked at Lin Sun. As soon as this remark came out, it immediately attracted many people's attention. In the previous fighting training, there were examples of exchanging opponents. For example, when there was a great disparity in strength between the two sides, they would often exchange their opponents with the same strength tacitly. This rule was also acquiesced by young Ku. But if they wanted to do so, they must get the consent of exchanging opponents. Therefore, many people were not surprised when Chi Kan proposed to exchange opponents with Lin Sun at this moment. But it was obvious that Chi Kan couldn't bear to see Shin Wenbin being trampled by Lin Sun. With this idea, many people could not help but secretly breathe a sigh of relief. They wanted to see whether Lin Sun would have the courage to agree. Lin Sun, it's a great honor to be selected by Brother Chi Kan. If you have the guts, agree. Yes, if you really dare to do so, I may change my opinion about you. Dare you or not, you only know how to bully Shin Wenbin. Even if you win, it will be shameful. Those trainees who were in the same circle with Chi Kan all took the opportunity to shout. There was no rule against making noise in the training, so they dared to provoke Lin Sun fearlessly and tried to make Lin Sun agree. As long as Lin Sun agreed, it would not only change Shin Wenbin's current situation, but also Lin Sun and Chi Kan would beat Shin Wenbin back and vent his anger. Of course, all this depended on whether Lin Sun agreed or not. Lin Sun, if you are a man and still have the dignity of a strong man, you should accept this challenge. Otherwise, I will look down on you for the rest of my life, Wen Mingxiu also said. She was a very popular girl in Camp 39 with a charming appearance and a proud look. At this moment, as soon as she spoke, many people echoed her. At this time, any hot-blooded man would choose to agree for the sake of dignity. After all, it was about the beauty's opinion and personal honor. Which young man would be afraid? Ning Ming secretly thought that Lin Sun was despicable. He was worried that Lin Sun would agree in a rush. Lin Sun suddenly turned his head and glanced at those trainees who kept shouting. He kicked Shin Wenbin out of the arena and then said with emotion, "Sorry, I like to learn from each other with Child Shin. He not only let me experience the happiness of harvest, but also gave me a sense of achievement that you can't understand. I'm not an ungrateful person. How can I let his kindness down?" As he said, he cupped his hands in front of his chest in shame. "In addition, I appreciate your kindness. Everyone thinks that I can compete with Child Chi Can, which is also a recognition of my strength. But I think that compared with Child Chi Can, I still have a long way to go. There are still many shortcomings to be improved, so I don't want to make a fool of myself. If I disappoint you." Speaking of this, Lin Sun suddenly smiled and said leisurely, "You don't dare to break the rules to beat me, do you? Don't make trouble. Everyone's time is precious. Child Shin is waiting to give me points." Chapter 126. As Lin Sun's voice fell, the whole audience was silent. It was so shameless. Looking at Lin Sun, who was calm and composed, everyone had the same thought in their mind, which made them dumbfounded. Everyone could imagine that Lin Sun would not be willing to accept the challenge from Chi Can, but they still couldn't imagine that this guy would refuse it so confidently and shamelessly. What gratitude for everyone's kindness. What shame. Even a blind man would be able to see through such nonsense. However, he actually said it in such a dignified manner. Could it be that he didn't know what shamelessness was? Especially when they heard Lin Sun say seriously that no one dared to violate the rules to beat him even if they didn't agree with him. Many people had a strong impulse to rush over and beat this shameless guy at all costs. It was so irritating. Chi Can's handsome face became gloomy. Wen Mingxiu was so angry that she gritted her teeth. The trainees who were in the same circle with them looked even more gloomy. They had seen shameless people, but it was the first time for them to see a shameless person like Lin Sun who had no grace, moral integrity, and lower limit. This guy, sure, you in the distance couldn't help but be stunned. You probably didn't expect that Lin Sun had such a shameless side. Li Qiu looked puzzled. Was this really the person that Child you appreciated? But it was too. He didn't know how to describe it. Ning Ming couldn't help but burst into laughter. He laughed so hard that his tears almost flowed out. How could he say such fake nonsense in a righteous and serious manner? It was so bad. Hearing Ning Ming's unscrupulous laughter, many people in the field looked more and more gloomy. At this time, with a puff, Shin Wenbin, who had been beaten black and blue by Lin Sun and lost his heart, vomited blood and fainted because of anger. All of a sudden, the whole audience was in an uproar. Shin Wenbin was so angry that he vomited blood and fainted. But it was reasonable to think about it. First, he was beaten by Lin Sun again and again, and then he heard Lin Sun's shameless remarks. No one could bear such a great shame. For a moment, many people looked at Lin Sun with disgust, anger, hatred, and contempt. Lin Sun didn't seem to notice all this. Seeing Shin Wenbin in a coma, he sighed with a little regret and said, "Alas, Child Shin didn't stick to the end. Maybe he is also very ashamed of me." Hearing this, the blue veins on their foreheads bulged, and they almost couldn't control the impulse to kill in their hearts. Lin Sun absolutely did it on purpose, but Lin Sun still ignored them. He turned his head and looked at Young, who's standing at the door of the fighting field. He cupped his hands and asked, "Drill Master, is it possible for Child Xian to wake up immediately?" Everyone was stunned. Does this guy want to continue to trample on Shin Wenbin? Lin Sun, don't be too proud. Wen Mingxiu couldn't help but scream. You're going too far. I'll teach you a lesson next time. A shameless person like you is destined to not have a good ending in the future. The others also started cursing angrily. The scene was a little chaotic for a while. Many trainees had been disturbed and stopped the ongoing fighting training. Seeing this, Young Ku at the door looked at Lin Sun, who still turned a deaf ear to Lin Sun. Even she couldn't help but have a strange feeling in her heart, and her lips twitched imperceptibly. It's almost time. The training is over. As soon as Young Ku spoke, she suppressed the restlessness of the audience. From beginning to end, she didn't make any comment on Lin Sun's behavior just now. This made many people dissatisfied, but thinking that Lin Sun didn't seem to violate the training rules from beginning to end, they could only bear it no matter how dissatisfied they were. This farce in the fighting field came to an end. After this incident, Lin Sun completely got rid of the infamy of coward. But because of Shin Wenbin, he was called shameless again. No matter what, at least from today on, no one dared to look down on Lin Sun as before. Even many people were quite afraid of the means he showed today. Shin Wenbin's father was the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army of the Forbidden City. His background was so powerful that even people like Qi Can needed to win him over. But Lin Sun dared to fight against Shin Wenbin so unscrupulously, which meant that either he was not afraid of Shin Wenbin's revenge at all, or he was desperate. But no matter which one it was enough to make many people afraid. In the bloodthirsty camp, the rules were the rules. The identity and status in the outside world were of no use at all. So before leaving the bloodthirsty camp, if they wanted to fight with Lin Sun to death, they had to consider the risks and costs. Shin Wenbin was the best example. He was not only abused miserably, but also lost 17 or 18 points. After this incident, at least in the bloodthirsty camp, Shin Wenbin had completely lost his reputation and face in front of Lin Sun. The price was too heavy. Many people could see that Lin Sun was establishing his prestige. The means he used were extremely cruel and ruthless, so that no one dared to treat him like before. But in Shiryu's view, Lin Sun's behavior today was a little confusing. Wasn't he worried at all that Lin Sun had completely offended the circle of Shin, Wenbin, and Qi Can? Or Lin Sun had been prepared in his heart, so he dared to act like this? Shiryu was a little uncertain. The suspicion and discussion caused by the end of the farce were soon replaced by the monthly assessment that was about to begin tomorrow. The results of the monthly assessment were related to whether each trainee would be eliminated or not. It was also related to the honor of each trainee and even the whole camp. Therefore, no one dared to be careless. After the combat training, Lin Sun left with Ning Meng and went to the material warehouse in the camp. Lin Sun planned to exchange his points for a handy weapon to prepare for the monthly assessment tomorrow. Lin Sun didn't notice that when he left, Young Ke looked at his back and was lost in thought. What kind of teenager was he on Earth? For the first time, Young Ke found that she had never really understood Lin Sun. When she sparred with him alone, this teenager showed a calm, silent, tenacious, and persistent nature. He had a very high talent and understanding for martial arts cultivation. It was not difficult to imagine that he would definitely become a real overmatch in the future. But when he discussed spiritual tattoos with old M.O., he seemed to become another person. He was in high spirits, full of energy, and his eyebrows were full of self-confidence and the spirit of controlling everything. If this was his nature, Young Ke was a little confused when she saw the means Lin Sun used to deal with Shin Wenbin today. Those trainees might think that Lin Sun was shameless and had no bottom line, but Young Ke felt a trace of inexplicable chill when she saw Lin Sun's behavior. What kind of enemy was the most terrible? That was the enemy who had no bottom line, was unscrupulous, and would do anything. This kind of person would never put personal honor and dignity in his eyes, nor would he care about the threat of status, identity, and power. He even didn't care about his own death. It could be imagined how terrible it was to be the enemy of this kind of person. Young Ke was not sure whether Lin Sun was this kind of person or not. She didn't even know which Lin Sun was the real Lin Sun. What kind of environment did he undergo that gave him such a complicated personality? Young Ke suddenly realized that this 13 or 14-year-old boy was hiding a lot of things that even she couldn't understand. When Lin Sun and Ning Meng left the material warehouse together, there was an ordinary saber in his hand, which was 2 feet and 4 inches long and 3 fingers wide. Its whole body was made of golden wave refined iron. Ning Meng was puzzled. This broken saber was not even a spiritual weapon, which could be exchanged for 3 points. It was far from being comparable with a spiritual weapon. Why did Lin Sun choose it? As far as Ning Meng knew, trainees in the camp now spent a lot of points to exchange for satisfactory spiritual weapons for the monthly assessment tomorrow, including Ning Meng himself. In this way, Lin Sun's action of exchanging for an ordinary weapon seemed a little abnormal. The most incredible thing for Ning Meng was that Lin Sun now had 469 points, which could be ranked in the middle position in the camp today. But 3 weeks ago, Lin Sun's points had been in the last place. Lin Sun didn't participate in the training in the past 3 weeks. Where did he get so many points? And he even reversed his last place in one fell swoop? Lin Sun didn't explain it. It was a secret and an agreement between him and old Mo that no one could mention it before the newly transformed Zing battleship was completed. Although Ning Meng was very dissatisfied, he could roughly guess that Lin Sun must have gained a lot of benefits from the spiritual tattooist in the past 3 weeks. Otherwise, neither his points nor the combat effectiveness he showed today could be so amazing. I don't know what to say about you. You are low-key, but today you have completely offended Qi, Kan, and Xin Wenbin. You are arrogant, but no one knows how many hidden means you have now. Ning Meng sighed with emotion. Lin Sun gave him the feeling that he was more arrogant than anyone else when he should be arrogant, but when he should be low-key, it was easy for people to ignore his existence. So it was hard to describe what kind of person Lin Sun was. You only need to know that we are not enemies, Lin Sun said casually with a smile. Damn it, we are enemies. I'm not afraid of you, okay? Ning Meng said angrily. Lin Sun said, oh, and said no more. You should be careful in tomorrow's monthly assessment. I heard that there are not only many people in Camp 40, but also many powerful people. Don't be careless. Ning Meng reminded Lin Sun, and then they separated and returned to the camp. Lin Sun thought for a while and returned to Old Mo's warehouse. Under the surprised gaze of young man, he directly asked old Mo for an inscribing pen and a dish of blue water spiritual ink. Of course, he would not be so stupid to take an ordinary weapon to the monthly assessment. He was a spiritual apprentice with experience in refining spiritual weapons. How could he spend a lot of points to exchange for a spiritual weapon? Want a spiritual weapon? He could refine it by himself. Chapter 127. In the warehouse, Lin Sun sat upright in front of the high platform, holding a sharp inscribing pen and dipping it into the blue water spiritual ink. He controlled the spiritual energy with his delicate perception and integrated it into the tip of the pen. Then he began to inscribe on the saber. His back was ramrod straight, and his expression was focused and serious. His handsome face had an extraordinary calmness, like an ancient well without ripples. Have you ever seen anyone in martial realm who can refine a spiritual weapon? In the distance, young man gazed at Lin Sun's back with starry eyes, looking a little dazed. Yes, but it's very, very rare. Among the 3 spiritual rune aristocratic families of the empire, there are some extremely talented descendants who can achieve this. Old Mo muttered, have you ever seen someone like Lin Sun? Young man continued to ask, still looking a little dazed. Before old Mo answered, young man said, no, at least I haven't heard of it. He is only a spiritual apprentice at the age of 13 or 14. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would doubt it. There was a trace of emotion in her voice. Old Mo's expression was also a little complicated. This boy is really unique. I once met a female student named Feng Qingyu in Green Deer School. She was about the same age as this boy, and she also had unimaginable attainments in spiritual tattoos. Several years later, she became a spiritual tattooist at the age of 19, which shocked the whole Green Deer School and caused a sensation in the capital. She was crowned as a genius girl. After a pause, he continued, later, I knew that her father was the head of Feng family, one of the 3 great families of spiritual tattoos, and her master was the dean of the spiritual tattoo department of Green Deer School. So it was not surprising that she could have the title of spiritual tattooist at the age of 19. Hearing this, young man suddenly said, you mean that Lin Sun is different from this girl named Feng Qingyu? Old Mo nodded. Indeed. Lin Sun's attainments in spiritual tattoos are even stronger than Feng Qingyu's. At least, Feng Qingyu couldn't transform the spiritual furnace of Zing battleship at that time. Only by comparison could one know the real value of an object, and the same was true for people. Hearing all this, young man couldn't help but feel excited. She looked at Lin Sun's back in the distance with a strange expression. So, this boy's future achievements are destined to be no less than that of Feng Qinyu? Old Amo nodded without hesitation and said, "What I'm wondering now is where does this boy come from? People like him shouldn't appear in the bloodthirsty camp at all." Young man frowned and said, "Old Amo, you'd better not leak anything about Lin Sun. He is still young. If he is targeted by others, he may have unimaginable honor and status in the future, but he is also destined to become a vassal of others and have no choice." Old Mo's face changed slightly. He did have this idea. In his opinion, it was a waste for Lin Sun to stay in the bloodthirsty camp. He should be in the Forbidden City or the Green Deer School, where he was destined to shine, realize his ambition, and be famous all over the world. "Don't forget how you came to the bloodthirsty camp." Young man glanced at Old Mo. Her words made Old Mo's face change dramatically. Finally, he said dejectedly and bitterly, "Indeed, without enough power, no matter how lofty the honor and status is, it's just an illusion. It can't resist the arbitrary manipulation of those big shots." Young man said, "Old Mo, I hope you remember what you said. I will report what happened today to Chief Shu one by one. I believe that if he knows it, he will have the same idea as me." Chief Shu was Shu Sanchi. Hearing this, Old Mo completely extinguished the last hope in his heart and said, "Well, I just cherish talents. Since you don't agree, I don't want to say anything more." At this time, with a buzzing sound, the whole warehouse was filled with the sound of the saber-like tide. Old Mo and young man looked up at the same time and saw that Lin Sun had stood up and was carefully looking at the saber in his hand. The surface of the saber was covered with ripples of spiritual light. Its color was like a blue sea and lake, giving people a sense of vastness. He succeeded, and he succeeded at the first time. Old Mo and young man were so experienced that they could see at a glance that the saber, which was originally just an ordinary weapon, had been reborn and became a spiritual weapon. Green Wave Saber. They looked at each other and could see the shock in each other's eyes that could not be concealed. The success rate was made by a spiritual tattoo apprentice on the 7th level of Martial Realm. It was really shocking. It was late at night, but Camp 40 was not peaceful. All 39 trainees were gathered together and stood in a hall of the camp, listening to the analysis of their drill master, Residual Wolf. Crippled Wolf was a thin man with ghastly pale skin and eyes that were narrow and long like blades. His entire bearing was feminine and cold, and he just happened to be like a wolf that roamed the wasteland and intended to choose its prey to devour. Drillmaster Young Ku is very powerful. Among the 40 camps, she is one of the most ruthless people I don't want to fight against. Residual Wolf's feminine voice, which was like the hissing of a poisonous snake, sounded. Even if they had been used to it, it still made many trainees feel cold. You all know that Camp 39 has the highest elimination rate, which means that the remaining 24 trainees must be the elites of the elites. If you are careless when you fight against them tomorrow, you will be eliminated. Residual Wolf's analysis made many trainees look serious. However, you don't need to be too afraid. Not to mention the advantage of the number of trainees, our Camp 40 is not inferior to any of them in terms of the overall fighting capacity of each trainee. Speaking of this, Residual Wolf suddenly pointed to a young boy with a vigorous figure and extraordinary bearing and said, "Like Di Jun, he can fight against any one of Li Qiu, Wen Ming Xiu, and Mao Lengshin of Camp 39. The young boy who was pointed out had a flash of light in his eyes. He cupped his hands and said, "Di Jun will not let you down, Drill Master." Residual Wolf made no comment and pointed to a valiant girl with long hair coiled in a bun, saying, "Lei Xinyue is also good, but you should be careful to meet Ningming. Both of you practice the martial arts of Thunder Property. Once you meet each other, the battle is bound to be fierce." Lei Xinyue slightly raised her chin and said with some expectation, "I want to see whether the thunder power of all directions of the Ning family is more powerful, or the Gang Thunder swordsmanship of my Lei family is more powerful." Residual Wolf still made no comment. He glanced around and fixed his eyes on a teenager with the most common appearance and temperament among the trainees. After a long silence, he said, "Gong Ming, you should know that the most difficult people in Camp 39 are Shiryu, Ning Ming, and Shi Kan. I hope you could defeat any one of them as much as possible." As soon as these words came out, all the trainees were stunned and restless. Gong Ming was extremely ordinary among them. His score and ranking could only be regarded as medium. His performance had been so ordinary that it was easy for people to ignore his existence. But no one expected that Drill Master Residual Wolf would pay so much attention to Gong Ming at this time, which was too unexpected. Some trainees who knew the details and origin of Gong Ming knew that Drill Master Residual Wolf's arrangement was the most correct. Few people in the world dared to look down upon the descendants of the Gong family, who had the title of Tumbler in the Empire. Gong Ming didn't say much about Residual Wolf's attention, but just nodded. All in all, Shiryu, Ning Ming, and Shi Kan are the top 3 trainees in Camp 39. No matter who meets them, they should try their best. In addition to them, Li Xiao, Wen Mingxiu, and Mao Lengshan are also not to be underestimated. As for the other trainees in Camp 39, they are roughly the same as the trainees in Camp 40. In tomorrow's monthly assessment, it depends on your performance. Speaking of this, Residual Wolf took a deep breath and said, "Remember, tomorrow's assessment is not only related to whether you will be eliminated, but also to whether the whole Camp 40 will be removed. I hope you won't let me down." All the trainees were solemn, and their eyes were full of high morale. At this time, someone suddenly said, "Drill Master, I heard that Camp 39 is very lively today. A guy named Lin Sun beat Shin Wenbin until he vomited blood and fainted, which caused a great disturbance. Do you think Lin Sun is worth paying attention to?" Lin Sun? Many people were confused because they heard this name for the first time. Residual Wolf didn't know this name either. He frowned and said, "This kind of thing happens almost every day in the 40 camps. It's not strange." This sentence meant that Lin Sun was not as important as trainees like Shiryu, Ning Ming, and Shi Kan. He couldn't even be compared with Li Qiu, Wen Mingxiu, and Mao Lengshan. They could pay attention to him, but they didn't need to pay too much attention to him. Conversations like this before the monthly assessment took place in almost every camp that night. The air of the whole bloodthirsty camp was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Only Camp 39 was quiet. Those who should practice practiced, and those who should sleep slept. It seemed that there was no difference from every night in the past. This might be the training style of Drill Master Young Ku. The next morning, at dawn, a treasure ship crushed the clouds and landed in Camp 39. Then, carrying Young Ku, Lin Sun, and other 24 trainees, it soared into the sky and disappeared. Almost at the same time, treasure ships took off from different camps. The scene was spectacular. Today was the day of the monthly assessment. At the end of today, half of the 40 camps in the bloodthirsty camp would be eliminated, which meant that many trainees would be eliminated. The monthly assessment was divided into different areas and places. The confrontation between Camp 39 and Camp 40 was arranged in an assessment area called Scorpion Ridge. This was a rare barren mountain area in the desert, covering an area of about 100 miles. It didn't seem large, but the terrain was complex and rugged, full of poisonous insects and fierce beasts. It was extremely dangerous. The content of this monthly assessment was very simple. The trainees of the 2 camps would be placed in different places of the Scorpion Ridge. With the Scorpion Ridge as the scope, a unique and cruel fight would start. P.S. Thanks for the tips from the bad guy and all the brothers and sisters and the monthly tickets. After 2 consecutive days, Lin Sun's body couldn't stand it anymore. Let goldfish recover in these days. Since it was put on the shelf, the number of times it would break out in the future would be more. Chapter 128. In the Scorpion Ridge. The monthly assessment had started for 2 hours. In a secluded swamp, there was a layer of gray miasma. Entering it, one's vision would be greatly affected and it was dangerous. Whoosh! Suddenly, a figure like a raccoon swept over from a distance. His movements were vigorous and neat, and he landed silently like a ghost. It was a young man with a long and narrow face. His entire body emitted a vigorous aura. He held a long spear in his hand, and his body was slightly arched. Every step he took was silent, and his eyes were filled with vigilance. The young man was Fong Song, one of the elite trainees in Camp 39. After confirming that there was no danger around, Fong Song did not relax his vigilance. He carefully came to the swamp and looked for something with his eyes twinkling. The environment here is quite excellent. If I hide under the swamp, as long as someone passes by, I can take it by surprise and kill him. Fong Song pondered for a while, holding the spear tightly in his hand, and walked toward the swamp. At this moment, he looked more vigilant and ran all his strength, which could ensure that he could make the fiercest counterattack before the sudden danger appeared. Soon, Fong Song's legs were submerged in the swamp. The smelly mud was like a whirlpool, which seemed to be able to drag people into it and make them unable to extricate themselves. After 7 steps forward, there was no danger, which made Fong Song feel relieved. He bent down and squatted down, ready to hide under the swamp. With the natural miasma here to hide his trace, he could make a sudden attack as long as someone passed by. Just when Fong Song bent his body slightly, the swamp beside him suddenly exploded, and a sword light rushed out and stabbed from his back. There was an ambush. However, Fong Song seemed to have expected it. A grim smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Almost at the same time when the sword light rushed out, the spear in his hand fiercely chopped down as if it had eyes. Bang! The spear, glowing with black light, shook off the long sword and did not lose its momentum. It fiercely inserted into the swamp. Suddenly, a scream came out, and a figure staggered out. It was a girl covered with black muddy water, and her face could not be seen clearly. She held a gray dagger in her hand, and there was a bloody wound on her right leg. As soon as she appeared, the girl twisted her waist without hesitation and fled away like an arrow from the bow. "You want to leave? Leave your nameplate first." Fong Song shouted and rushed forward. His spear was like lightning, stabbing at the back of the girl's waist. His speed was swift, accurate, and ferocious to the extreme. It was swift and terrifying to the extreme, and it revealed his extremely ferocious combat instinct. If the girl continued to run, she would definitely be severely injured by this attack. If the girl turned around to resist, she would be a step slower. Although she could block the attack, she would definitely be trapped on the spot. To Fong Song's surprise, the girl suddenly turned her head and revealed a mysterious smile. Her face was covered with black mud, revealing a mouthful of white and neat teeth. A strong sense of danger rose in Fong Song's heart. He withdrew his spear almost without hesitation and dodged to one side. But it was obviously a step too late. Just as Fong Song dodged, a spear shadow quietly swept out from the swamp on the other side and stabbed into Fong Song's abdomen at an incredible speed. Puff! As the spear stabbed into his body, Fong Song felt a sharp pain and blood burst out. He gritted his teeth and waved his spear to fight back. But behind him, the girl, who was trying to escape, had already attacked. Taking advantage of this opportunity, she slashed down with her sword, leaving a deep wound on Fong Song's back. Fong Song's internal organs were almost broken under the attack of the spear and the sword. Fong Song immediately understood that he had suffered a series of ambushes. He did not dare to hesitate and immediately shouted, "I give up." With that, he threw away the spear in his hand without hesitation, took out a nameplate, and threw it out. Then he gasped for breath, and his face was distorted because of the sharp pain. Puff! The spear was pulled out of Fong Song's abdomen with a string of blood, which made Fong Song groan again. He trembled all over and almost fell into the swamp. A tall man stood up in the swamp, holding a spear and looking at Fong Song indifferently. "My friend, I'm sorry." The girl chuckled and bent down to pick up the nameplate that had been thrown into the swamp. "Humph! 2 people ambushed together. What a disgrace." Fong Song gritted his teeth and shouted. Just as she was shouting, Fong Song suddenly rushed forward. In an instant, he strangled the girl's neck with his arm. At the same time, he turned his fingertips and a blade appeared, which he put against the girl's throat. This sudden change was extremely abrupt. No one would have thought that Fong Song would still dare to take a risk when he was so seriously injured, and he even succeeded in doing so. The eyes of the man holding the spear suddenly became cold, but he did not dare to act rashly. The girl's face was extremely ugly. Her body was stiff, and she did not dare to move. She said in a sarcastic voice, "Are all the people in Camp 39 as shameless as you? Don't talk nonsense. Give me back the nameplate, or I will cut your throat now. Don't worry, you will not die. There is enough time for your drill master to save you in time." Fong Song sneered. His face was pale, and the wound on his abdomen was still painful, but he was very proud at the moment. The boy's face suddenly changed. He raised the nameplate with difficulty and said, "I give up." "Smart." Fong Song looked ferocious. As he spoke, he grabbed the nameplate with his left hand. Swish! But at this moment, the man holding the spear, who had been standing still, suddenly moved. The spear tip stabbed towards Fong Song like a flowing rainbow. The shadow of the spear, wrapped in terrible spiritual power, tore the air, regardless of the girl's life or death. Puff! Fong Song also looked extremely cruel at this moment. He cut the girl's throat with the blade and then pushed her out. At the same time, he turned around and fled. The direction of his escape was to the depth of the swamp, where miasma was dense and foggy. "You hold on. The drill master will definitely come in time." The man holding the spear told the girl, and then chased after Fong Song without hesitation. Fong Song's abdomen was pierced, and there was a sword wound on his back. It was destined that he could not escape. The man holding the spear was confident to kill this cunning and cruel opponent of Camp 39. Damn it, the girl was lying in the swamp. Her throat bone was almost cut open. Blood flowed out, which looked extremely horrifying. She tore a piece of cloth from her clothes carefully and tied it to the wound on her throat. She knew that if no one came to save her in a quarter of an hour, she would die. The only thing she could do was to wait. The girl was full of unwillingness. Clatter! Suddenly, another figure emerged from the nearby swamp. He was thin and slender, and he held a completely dark, dull, and lusterless saber as he strode over. The girl was shocked. There was another ambush here. She was knocked out by a palm when she was about to call for help. Then she saw the figure fumble on her body and take out a nameplate. "Not bad. I got a bargain." The thin figure chuckled, covered with mud. He showed a warm smile and hid the nameplate on his body. Then he turned around and rushed towards the direction where the man holding the spear was chasing Fong Song. This figure was naturally Lin's son. Since the beginning of the monthly assessment, he was placed near this swamp and chose to hide in it without hesitation. The man holding the spear and the girl came later. They also chose this swamp, but they didn't find Lin's son. The reason why Lin's son didn't take action was that there were two of them. Once he took action, even if he could seriously injure one of them, the other would inevitably be entangled with him. The situation was bound to be very unfavorable for him. He waited quietly for an hour. The arrival of Fong Song completely changed the situation. After a fierce and treacherous fight, Lin Sun finally got a bargain. This might be called the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Not long after Lin Sun left, a treasure ship fell from the sky. Two camp attendants walked out and took the fainted girl away quickly. The miasma was heavy and dangerous, but Lin Sun was extremely fast. His soul perception was so powerful that he could perceive all the movements within a range of 100 feet. This ability from the soul could only be achieved by the strong practitioners in the gang spirit realm. Lin Sun knew that the top practitioners in the martial realm like Ning Ming could only perceive within a range of 60 feet at most. Therefore, Lin Sun was very confident that few trainees in this monthly assessment could have a stronger perception than him. Naturally, this became Lin Sun's unique advantage. Especially in the Scorpion Ridge, with a complex environment and many dangers, a strong perception could help Lin Sun avoid many dangers in advance. Not long after, Lin Sun heard a sound of fighting. Moving forward, he saw the man holding the spear fighting with Fong Song. Obviously, Fong Song couldn't hold on any longer. He was seriously injured before. Now that the man holding the spear caught up with him, it could be imagined how dangerous the situation was. Bang! The man holding the spear sent Fong Song flying with a sudden strike. When he was about to make another strike to suppress Fong Song completely, he suddenly narrowed his eyes and swept backward without hesitation. Swish! Before he saw the enemy, he saw a flash of saber light coming head-on. It seemed to be fierce and fierce, but when it touched the spear, it suddenly changed. The edge of the saber was like a maggot attached to a bone, shaking along the spear. With a loud bang, the spear attack was shattered. The man's figure staggered, and before he could stabilize himself, the blade was pressed against his neck. The man holding the spear stiffened, and his pupils shrank. Then he saw clearly that his opponent was a teenager with a saber, covered with mud, and only a pair of dark and deep eyes could be seen. This person was naturally Lin Sun. After subduing the opponent with one strike, Lin Sun did not hesitate to knock out the man holding the spear. With another nameplate in his hand, Lin Sun couldn't help but sigh that it was so cool to take advantage of others. Lin Sun, it's you. In the distance, Fong Song gasped for breath and got up. He was covered with mud and blood, and the wound on his abdomen was still bleeding. Although Lin Sun saved him at this moment, he was not happy at all. He even looked at Lin Sun with anger and unwillingness in his eyes. Why didn't you show up just now? Have you made up your mind to take advantage of me when I can't stand it? Fong Song gritted his teeth and asked hoarsely. How could Lin Sun admit this? He shook his head resolutely and said, Fong Song, you think too much. On the contrary, you should be grateful to me. If I hadn't arrived in time, you would have been defeated. While speaking, Lin Sun sneered in his heart. Fong Song, Chi Can, Xin Wenbin, and Wen Mingxiu were in the same circle. It was good enough that Lin Sun didn't help him. Chapter 129. Hearing Lin's words, Fong Song was stunned for a moment and suddenly said bitterly, Well, this is my fate. I can't blame you. But can I ask you one thing? Lin Sun said, Go ahead. Fong Song begged, Help me. I'm seriously injured and can't hold on any longer. Please take me out of the swamp. It's too dangerous here. There may be some poisonous insects and fierce beasts. I don't want to be eliminated. He was seriously injured, and his physical strength was on the verge of exhaustion. If no one helped him, he would be eliminated from the assessment immediately. Lin Sun nodded and said, Well, I'll carry you for a while. Thank you. Thank you. Fong Song was ecstatic. Lin Sun smiled, squatted down, and said, Come on up. With his back to Fong Song, he didn't see the complacency in Fong Song's eyes at the moment. Lin Sun, no matter how treacherous you are, you can't escape from my trap. Fong Song sneered in his heart and staggered forward with a weak look. Between his fingers, a blade was tightly clenched and ready to attack. But when he was only one step away from Lin Sun, who was squatting, suddenly bent his back like a bow and rushed back fiercely. Bang! Before Fong Song could react, he was shaken out and fell into the smelly swamp with a scream. This blow was so fierce that Fong Song was dazzled and his bones almost fell apart. He couldn't help coughing up blood and roared ferociously. Lin Sun, do you want to kill your companions? Do you know that you will be expelled from the bloodthirsty camp if Drillmaster can knows it? Lin Sun turned around and walked to Fong Song leisurely. He twisted Fong Song's wrist with his right hand and clamped a cold blade from between Fong's fingers. All of a sudden, Fong Song's face changed, and he said stiffly, This is my weapon for self-defense. Why do you take away my weapon? Lin Sun smiled and said, Don't you want to admit it? I'm kind enough to save you, but you want to hurt me with this thing. Do you really think I'm stupid? Although Lin Sun was smiling, his voice was cold. What are you talking about? Fong Song was displeased. Lin Sun, even if you don't want to save me, you don't have to slander me like this, do you? Ho, do you think I can't guess it? Lin Sun said disdainfully, In the rules of this monthly assessment, there is no rule against killing each other. You must have seen this point and wanted to take the opportunity to take away my nameplates. Do you think you can deceive me with your little trick? Fong Song's face changed again. He didn't expect that Lin Sun would reveal all his inner calculations at once. He was shocked and said, "What you want?" Lin Sun said with a smile, "Of course I won't do anything to make Drill Master Young Ku unhappy, but you're seriously injured now and can't fight anymore. It's difficult for you to protect the nameplate you wear. Instead of letting the enemy take advantage of you, why don't you give it to me and let me keep it for you? After all, we are from the same camp." If Drill Master Young Ku knew about this, she would definitely praise me for my righteousness. Fong Song felt a chill in his heart. Lin Sun really didn't want to let him go. Before he could react, he felt a sharp pain in his neck and fainted. "Now, you have to be in a coma for a while." Lin Sun sighed. He reached out and groped Fong Song for a while and found a nameplate. Woo! A sharp whistle resounded through the sky. It was the signal of the trainees of Camp 39 to leave the battlefield. Of course, the whistle was Fong Song's, but it was blown by Lin Sun. Before the whistle died away, Lin Sun had left the area. Before long, a treasure ship arrived and a fat middle-aged man jumped off. He first looked at the comatose man with a spear and then at Fong Song. Suddenly, a strange expression appeared on his face. Almost all the clues and traces on the scene were seen by him at a glance. He roughly knew what had happened just now. "Hey, you are really an unlucky little guy. I don't know who is so black-hearted to trap you so rudely. But that guy has a conscience to help you send a distress signal. Otherwise, when the guy with the spear wakes up, the consequences will be unimaginable." The fat middle-aged man laughed and turned back to the treasure ship with Fong Song in his hand. At the same time, in another area of Scorpion Ridge, this was a gloomy and damp forest. A thunderous roar rang out, and a large tree was crushed to the ground with a loud bang. The one who caused all this was just a young man with a majestic figure. It was Ning Meng. He rushed all the way with lightning flowing all over his body. His eyes were as bright as the sun and full of killing intent. He seemed to be possessed by the thunder god. His momentum was extremely terrifying. Just a moment ago, he'd experienced a fierce battle where he'd beaten an opponent to the point countless bones in his body had been broken, and the opponent had almost died on the spot. And this battle also won him the third nameplate. Damn, Camp 40 is a bunch of rubbish. I can't find a powerful person who can fight with me. Ning Meng complained discontentedly as he ran wildly. It wasn't long before his figure suddenly stopped, and his gaze was like a bolt of lightning as he looked into the distance. He saw two men and a woman in a triangular formation, and they were swiftly flying towards him. The leader was a vigorous and valiant girl with a ponytail. Ning Meng recognized her. Her name was Lei Xinyue. She practiced Gang Thunder swordsmanship, which was a secret fighting skill of Thunder property, like Thunder power of all directions that he practiced. Although the two teenagers beside Lei Xinyue were strange, they must be trainees of Camp 40. The three of them had come together, and under such circumstances, anyone would probably instinctively avoid the brunt of their attacks and retreat first. But Ning Meng didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward with an excited face and a terrible fighting desire burning all over his body. He murmured, "Don't let me down again in this battle." At the same time, Lei Xinyue also looked over. Obviously, she also recognized Ning Meng. Suddenly, a burning fighting desire appeared between her eyebrows. In an instant, the atmosphere was tense and a fight would break out at any moment. In another area, Shiryu's figure was like a graceful swan. With his big sleeves fluttering, he flew at full speed. His bearing was natural and unrestrained, and his speed was as fast as a flowing rainbow. This was Flowing Cloud, Star-Chasing Steps, an extremely mysterious and profound lightness skill. But at this moment, even though he used this skill, Shiryu didn't feel relaxed at all. Instead, he frowned all the time. Dozens of meters behind him, a figure was chasing him closely. Damn it, is this guy targeting me? Shiryu felt depressed. The guy chasing him was Gong Ming, an opponent that Shiryu didn't want to meet. But he didn't expect that he would meet Gong Ming at the beginning of the monthly assessment and when he was ready to show off his skills. Gong Ming looked very ordinary, but he was really difficult to deal with. The 9 Ghost Down Body Protection Cudgel he practiced could be said to have an abnormal defense. Shiryu was not afraid of him, but he was very clear that once he was entangled with Gong Ming, he would inevitably spend too much time and energy. He didn't want to waste time with such a person. But what sure you never expected was that since Gong Ming targeted him, he was like a cowhide plaster, chasing him all the way and couldn't get rid of him. Gong Ming, are you really going to waste time like this? Don't forget that if you don't get enough nameplates, it will be no good for you and me. Sure, you couldn't help raising his voice. I just need to defeat you. Gong Ming's answer was very simple, but it revealed a sense of stubbornness and determination, which made sure you feel a headache and annoyed. This little turtle was really annoying. Brother Gong Ming, let me help you. Suddenly, a roar sounded in the distance. With the sound, a figure rushed here and blocked Shiryu's way. Damn it. I can't get rid of him after all, Shiryu sighed in his heart and suddenly stopped. A touch of coldness flashed in his eyes, and a pair of bronze short maces appeared in his hands. The situation of Ning Meng and Shiryu almost happened in every area within hundreds of miles of the Scorpion Ridge. The competition was cruel and fierce. It was not only a head-on fight, but also unexpected surprise attacks, cunning and ruthless traps, and endless calculations. The trainees who could participate in it were all elites who stayed after a month of cruel training, and almost none of them was simple. Although they were all young, almost in their teens, when it came to fighting means and wisdom, some experienced adult practitioners were far inferior to them. Not far from the Scorpion Ridge, there was a temporary camp. The camp was divided into two areas, one occupied by Camp 39 and the other by Camp 40. Young Ke sat in the tent with a delicate compass in her hand. The surface of the compass was engraved with dense, spiritual tattoos, which were shining and outlined a light curtain in the void. This was his spiritual projector, a unique spiritual weapon, which was composed of a whole set. At this moment, every area of the Scorpion Ridge was buried with a spiritual projector. The scenes reflected by those spiritual projectors will be fed back to the spiritual projector in young Ke's hand, so that she could clearly see all the movements in the Scorpion Ridge. The monthly assessment had lasted for more than 1 hour, and there were only 4 hours left before the end. Up to now, 5 trainees from Camp 39 had been eliminated in the assessment, while 9 trainees from Camp 40 had been eliminated. It seemed that young Ke had a lot of advantages, but she was not happy at all. The result was far from her expectation. What made her frown the most was that the situation in the Scorpion Ridge was gradually becoming unfavorable to the trainees of Camp 39. Does Residual Wolf intend to play the tactic of bullying by numbers to the extreme? It seems that in order to preserve his Camp 40, he has forgotten the real purpose of training trainees. Young Ke murmured in her heart, with a touch of coldness surging in her eyes. In the temporary camp of Camp 40, Residual Wolf stroked his chin and stared at the spiritual projector in his hand. With a cruel smile on his lips, Young Ke, you should know that the members of the wolf pack will never act alone. Chapter 130. Seizing a nameplate was equal to getting 300 points. Losing the nameplate would eliminate the examinee from the assessment. Killing an opponent would cost one's life, which meant that in this assessment, no one dared to kill anyone, unless he didn't want to live. The assessment lasted for 6 hours. At the end of the assessment, the winner would be determined according to the final score of each trainee. The final result was that one of the 2 camps would be eliminated, leaving 30 trainees with the best scores, and the rest would be eliminated. These were the rules of this monthly assessment. In this assessment, there were 63 trainees in Camp 39 and Camp 40, but only 30 would be left, which meant that more than half of the trainees would leave the bloodthirsty camp completely after the assessment. Cruelty was inevitable, and no one was willing to be eliminated. Lin Sun didn't leave the swamp. He went back to his original hiding place. The girl whose throat was cut open had disappeared, but the traces of the battle were still there. If it was any other student who passed by this place, they would definitely be able to tell from these clues that an extremely dangerous ambush had taken place here. Lin Sun didn't destroy these traces, but just carefully erased his footprints and traces one by one, and then lurked there again. The traps might fail after being used once, but sometimes they would make people more relaxed. Lin Sun didn't intend to look for his opponent like a fly with its head in a mess. Within hundreds of miles of the Scorpion Ridge, the terrain was intricate and dangerous. If he took the initiative to attack, he would easily expose his traces. Instead of that, it was better to stay where he was and wait for his opponent. The assessment lasted for 6 hours. Now nearly 2 hours had passed, and there were only about 4 hours left. Whether in order to persist to the end or to save more physical strength, waiting for his opponent was undoubtedly the best choice. It was absolutely stupid to attack rashly. Lin Sun was very clear that the trainees who could persist until now in the bloodthirsty camp were absolutely not easy to deal with. Fighting against these smart people tested not only one's combat effectiveness, but also one's mind, strategy, and courage. At the same time, Lin Sun was also clear about his combat effectiveness. Although the cultivation of the 7th level of martial realm enabled him to have the spiritual energy as thick as that of a practitioner at the peak of the 9th level of martial realm, it was not an advantage. Nowadays, more than half of the trainees in the Scorpion Ridge had the ability of the peak of the 9th level of martial realm. People like Ning Ming, Shiryu, and Qi had suppressed their cultivation in this realm for many years. It could be imagined how terrible their strength was. As for the cultivation of martial arts, even with the marching, boxing, and 6-word saber play and mastery, Lin could only be regarded as a medium level. It couldn't be helped. The other students had great backgrounds, and they'd started cultivating the secret techniques that were specially prepared for them since they were young. The power and might of those techniques could be imagined. Compared with them, Lin Sun's marching, boxing, and mastery and 6-word saber play and accuracy were not outstanding, but they were not weak either. The only thing that gave Lin an advantage was his extremely strong soul perception and the green wave saber in his hand. Like the explosive flame saber, the green wave saber was also a spiritual weapon on the lower grade of human rank that was widely circulated in the market. But different from the green wave saber on the market, the green wave saber refined by Lin Sun was 20% more powerful. Such a situation happened when Lin Sun refined the explosive flame saber before. Later, the explosive flame saber refined by Lin Sun was renamed Flaming Spirit Saber. Now, the situation of the green wave saber was roughly the same. However, the green wave saber belonged to the water attribute, which was different from the explosive flame saber's fire attribute. Each had its own advantages. The reason why Lin Sun chose the green wave saber instead of the flaming spirit saber was that after many battles, he found that the wild and violent flaming spirit saber was not suitable for his fighting style. The green wave saber, on the other hand, could help him exert his combat effectiveness at will. Water was impermanent and ever-changing. It could turn into mist, it could freeze and seal, it could be as boundless as the ocean, it could hang upside down like the Milky Way, it could be as endless as the Yangtze River, or it could be like a whirlpool that engulfed the world. It was said that water was good like water, silent when it was small and turbulent when it was big. It could accommodate everything. This kind of boldness and style was most in line with Lin Sun's character. When it was tough, it could be worn through by dripping water. When it was small, it could be silent. When it confronted the enemy, it could be changeable and destructive. What Lin Sun did could also be regarded as a kind of progress on the road of cultivation. He had begun to consciously choose his own fighting style and path. As time went by, the swamp was silent, with only miasma and mist filling the air. The taste of lurking in the swamp was absolutely not good. Even breathing would be greatly suppressed. Every once in a while, Lin Sun had to breathe. Unless he had the cultivation of Gang Spirit Realm, he could adjust the qi around him with the method of internal breathing. Not long after, a slight sound of footsteps approached, which was instantly captured by Lin Sun's perception. This made him excited and ready to fight. On the edge of the swamp stood a short and fat teenager with dark skin and small eyes. He looked inconspicuous. He seemed to have run for a while and was a little out of breath. Standing on the edge of the swamp for a moment, he had noticed that there had been a fierce fight here. It's quite good to ambush here. The pudgy youth rolled his eyes and smiled. Everyone can see that there is an ambush here. Moreover, there has already been a fight. Naturally, no one can imagine that there will be another ambush here. Although the voice was low, it was keenly captured by Lin Sun. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. This guy was really smart. Had he seen through my ambush? Bang! Just as this thought came up in Lin Sun's mind, he heard an extremely harsh and powerful sound suddenly, like a sharp whistle cutting through the world. A strong sense of danger surged in his heart. Without any hesitation, Lin Sun rushed out of the swamp and dodged to one side. Boom! A dazzling cold light brushed against Lin Sun's shoulder and penetrated into the swamp, exploding a big pit there and splashing mud more than 30 meters away. Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart. If he had been a little slower, he would have been seriously injured even if he was not killed. Not until now did he see clearly that the short and fat teenager was holding a black crossbow in his hand. The surface of the crossbow was covered with dense patterns of spiritual tattoos like petals, showing a fascinating bloody color. Bloody armor-piercing crossbow, an imperial standard spiritual weapon. A bloody armor-piercing crossbow could be loaded with 12 special spiritual arrows. Its lethality was so terrible that it could penetrate the inner armor of ordinary spiritual weapons. The most terrible thing was that the crossbow was only as thick as a child's arm and half a foot long. It could be carried around, and it didn't need to consume any spiritual energy to kill the enemy. As long as the mechanism was pulled, the terrible power could be exerted. A bloody armor-piercing crossbow like this could be sold at a high price of 800 imperial silver coins in the market. Hey, my friend, you have a fast reaction. The short and fat teenager smiled, put away the bloody armor-piercing crossbow, and took out a long, sharp machete. This was the whalebone's spiritual saber, which was more mysterious and fierce than ordinary sabers. Once stabbed, the wound would be torn open and it was difficult to heal. Boom! Without any hesitation, the short and fat middle-aged man rushed to Lin Sun. Although he was smiling and short and fat, once he took action, he was fierce, decisive, and as fast as lightning, which was extremely terrible. Humph! Lin Sun snorted and rushed up with a green wave saber. Since the ambush had been seen through, it became a close fight. This kind of head-on confrontation depended on bravery, fierce momentum, and fighting skills. In this respect, Lin Sun would not flinch. Bang, bang, bang. The two fought fiercely in the swamp, like two hungry wolves fighting for the last right to survive. Soon, Lin Sun realized that the short and fat teenager was at the peak of the 9th level of martial realm, and his fighting style was treacherous and fierce. He was definitely a strong opponent. In particular, his saber skills were mysterious and unpredictable, like the tongue of a poisonous snake, which was extremely tricky. Obviously, it was an extremely powerful fighting skill. Lin Sun met a master of Camp 40. But the more it was like this, Lin Sun was full of fighting desire. Since he reached the 7th level of martial realm, he had not really exerted his full strength. As for the fight with Shin Wenbin yesterday, it was a kind of crushing and ravaging, not a real fight. Kill. Lin Sun's eyebrows were as sharp as a blade, and his black eyes were like lightning. His handsome face was full of concentration and calmness. In his hand, the green wave saber demonstrated the essence of the 6-word saber play to the extreme. However, just after a moment of fighting, the short and fat teenager suddenly jumped out of the battlefield and shouted, "My friend, how about not fighting? In the end, both of us will be hurt, and others will take advantage of us." Lin Sun ignored him and continued to rush up. He was not sure whether the short and fat teenager really thought so. Only by fighting could he avoid more accidents. Fuck. Seeing this, the short and fat teenager cursed and turned around to escape. His short and fat body was extremely flexible, and he soon escaped more than 30 meters away. Until now, Lin Sun was sure that the boy really didn't intend to continue fighting, because this distance was already a safe distance to avoid the bloody armor-piercing crossbow. My friend, your saber skills are very good. After this monthly assessment, we will definitely continue to fight together. The pudgy youth shouted, and his figure had already disappeared. Fight? Next time I meet you, fatty, I will kill you first." Lin Sun snorted coldly and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He also knew that if he continued to fight with the short and fat teenager, both of them were likely to be hurt, and others would take advantage of him. "It seems that I have to change a hiding place." Lin Sun glanced at the swamp and knew that it was useless to hide in it. However, Lin Sun was still very puzzled. How on earth did the fatty find him just now? Chapter 131. Who's this little fatty? In the central area of the bloodthirsty camp, there were 20 huge diffraction disc light screens floating in a grand and solemn hall. Each light screen showed the situation in an assessment battlefield. The slender and graceful young man seemed to notice something. She pointed at one of the light screens and asked in surprise. Shu Sanqi sat upright silently by her side. His gaunt face was cold like a rock, and his gaze was constantly staring at a few of the screens. When he heard this, he turned his head to glance at them and said, "Besides the descendants of the Yi clan of the EC province, who else can utilize these two unique secret techniques, the embroidered soul saber technique and the pupils of spiritual illumination?" Yi family, also known as Yi family of Donghai. It was an ancient family with a history of thousands of years. It had great power in the entire Donghai province. Yi Zhankong, the head of Yi family, was even crowned with the nickname King of Donghai. The descendant of Yi family. The young man said thoughtfully, no wonder he could find Lin's hiding place. It turns out that he has the help of spirit illuminating pupils. His name is Yi Qi. He's a good seedling. Shu Sanqi seemed to think of something and added, in the whole Yi family, there are very few people who have the qualification to practice spirit illuminating pupils. Yi Qi is one of them. Humph, no matter how powerful he is, he still escapes in the end. He still doesn't dare to fight with my handsome boy. The young man snorted and said proudly when she mentioned Lin's son. Shu Sanqi looked away and looked at other light screens. After a while, he said, "By Ling Shi, Zhao Yin, Zhang Sunheng, Li Duxing." After reading a string of names, he said, "Pay attention to them. They will be the most promising candidates to enter the gang-producing lake." Young man's starry eyes narrowed. Bai Lingshi was the eldest grandson of Jinghai Marquis and had the talent property of Starshine Eternal. Zhao Yin was the great-grandson of Bao Marquis of the Forbidden City and had the talent property of Purple Sunday. Zhang Sunheng was the grandson of General Zhang Sun Chunqiu of the Imperial Military Ministry. Li Duxing was the descendant of Li family, one of the 9 top aristocratic families in the Forbidden City. Every name represented an extremely outstanding young heaven's favorite. They could be said to be one in 10,000 geniuses. Young man naturally knew that people like him were the most promising candidates to enter the gang-producing lake. But when young man heard that Lin's name was not on the list, she was not convinced and said, "I think Lin is not bad. Even if he can't compare with Bai Lingshi and Zhao Yin, he can at least be compared with Ning Meng, Shi Yu, and Qi Can." Shu Sanqi frowned, his eyes as sharp as a blade. "This is just my preliminary opinion. No one can say for sure how many people can enter the gang-producing lake." After a pause, he continued, "Compared with these people, Lin Sun can only be regarded as above average. It's possible for him to enter the gang-producing lake, but it's not great unless a miracle happens." The young man still wanted to say something, but Shu Sanqi interrupted her. "Well, you'd better focus on whether Lin Sun will not be eliminated in the monthly assessment." The young man raised her slender and long eyebrows, but finally said no more. She asked herself that Lin Sun was indeed inferior to Bai Lingshi and others. But she also believed that if Lin Sun could pass the assessment and stay, he would definitely improve quickly in the following training. After all, others had already reached the 9th level of martial realm, while Lin Sun was only at the 7th level. It seemed to be a weakness, but it also meant that Lin Sun had more room for improvement. If Lin Sun could reach the 9th level of martial realm before the end of a year's training, he might be able to make up for the gap completely. "How is old Mo doing?" Shu Sanqi suddenly asked. "It's going well, but it still needs some time to succeed," the young man said quickly. "Well, as long as it can be finished before Lin Sun leaves." Shu Sanqi nodded. Young man couldn't help saying, "Chief Shu, can't we keep Lin Sun here?" Now you know that Lin Sun may not be as good as by Ling Shi and others, but he is a rare genius in the field of spiritual tattoos. According to old M.O., Feng Qingyu, the genius girl of Green Deer School, was not as good as him at that time. Shu Sanqi kept silent for a long time and said, "We can't keep him. Heiyao Shrine won't let him go easily." When it came to Heiyao Shrine, young man suddenly felt helpless and sighed in her heart. But they didn't know that Heiyao Shrine didn't know that Lin Sun had such a great talent in spiritual tattoos. They even didn't pay much attention to Lin Sun. Even if Lin Sun was sent to the bloodthirsty camp for training this time, it was all because of Xie Ji. In the temporary camp of number 40, touching his chin, Residual Wolf took back his eyes from the spiritual projector and suddenly chuckled. The outcome has been determined. In the temporary camp of number 39, as the assessment went on, young Ku's delicate eyebrows frowned little by little and never relaxed. The situation was not optimistic. Now 11 trainees of Camp 39 had been eliminated, leaving only 13. On the contrary, there were still 26 trainees in Camp 40. The gap in the number of trainees was not important, but when the other trainees chose the strategy of bullying the few and defeated the trainees of Camp 39 one by one, the situation was somewhat serious. Just like at this moment, Ning Ming was fighting fiercely with Lei Xinyue and other two people, but suddenly another trainee of Camp 40 joined in, so Ning Ming had to choose to escape temporarily. Lei Xinyue and others naturally wouldn't let him escape, so they kept chasing him. The same situation also happened to Shiryu, Li Qiu, and others. As for Qi Kan, when Ming Xiu, Mao Lengxin, and others, although they had different experiences from Ning Ming, Shiryu, and others, and they had realized the danger and began to unite with each other, they didn't have much advantage in the face of the wolf tactics of Camp 40. Young Ku could even imagine that when Ning Ming, Shiryu, and others were defeated one by one, Qi Kan and others were bound to be besieged more. Residual Wolf really doesn't want to be ashamed. Young Ku was a little angry in her heart. In her opinion, the monthly assessment was to test the trainee's ability to face danger alone, because in the real battlefield, there was no time to make careful arrangements. Everything depended on individual fighting and coping strategies. Telling the trainees how to deal with danger in advance was no different from cheating, and it couldn't achieve the real purpose of the assessment. But obviously, Residual Wolf didn't think so. He regarded this assessment as a competition that he was determined to win, so he made careful arrangements in advance. Undoubtedly, the real meaning of this assessment had changed, and it had been covered with the color of conspiracy and calculation. This was the most shameful thing for young Ku, but she couldn't say anything because there was no such restriction in the assessment rules. The trainees trained by Residual Wolf are the most qualified warriors. Fatty middle-aged came in, glanced at young Ku, whose face was as cold as frost, and said, "The difference between you and him is that the trainees trained by you are the real strongmen." Young Ku frowned. "Is there a difference?" Fatty middle-aged said, "Of course there is. Soldiers take obedience as the first priority, are proficient in fighting on the battlefield, and are good at arranging troops, but they lack a kind of spirit that one man can hold the pass against 10,000 enemies, and a kind of courage to cut off all means of retreat. This kind of spirit and courage can only be possessed by the real strongman." After a pause, he continued, "You should know that in the many wars of the Empire in the past, it is never these soldiers who know how to cooperate and obey orders, but the strong men who jump out of the battlefield and have long put life and death aside." Young Ku was silent for a moment. She agreed with this view, but she was more clear that once this monthly assessment failed, there was no need to talk about the difference between soldiers and strongmen. As the saying went, the winner was the king, and the loser could only be the eliminated party, who would remember that they had the possibility to become the real strongman. "Hey, there's a change." Suddenly, Fatty Middle-Aged shouted. He stared at the light screen projected by the spiritual projector and looked a little surprised. "It's this boy." Young Ko also looked over and immediately saw that Lin Sun's figure was approaching the direction where Ning Meng escaped. If this boy can cooperate with Ning Meng and defeat those enemies, he may change the situation. But as far as I know, this boy is only at the 7th level of martial realm, right? I don't know whether he can do it or not, Fatty Middle-Aged said quickly. Youngkin nodded and kept her eyes fixed on Lin Sun's figure. Immediately, she found that the direction where Sure Yu was escaping at the moment was also pointing to the same place. At this moment, Lin Sun, Ning Meng, and Sure Yu were like 3 black spots, converging towards the same place along different trajectories, and there would be a moment when they would meet each other. Maybe the success or failure depended on this move. A thought came to Young Ku's mind, but she was not sure. The dense jungle was dark and damp. Lin Sun was flying forward cautiously and silently like a shadow in the jungle. Compared with the swamp, the environment of the jungle was more complicated. There were hiding places everywhere, and it was a natural place for assassination. Lin Sun dared not to be careless. He even exerted the power of perception to the extreme. While moving forward, he carefully checked the surrounding environment for fear of encountering any ambush. At the same time, he was also looking for an excellent hiding place. This place must be able to pass by the enemies, but at the same time, it must be a place that the enemies could easily ignore. It was undoubtedly difficult to find such a place. At least until now, Lin Sun still hadn't found anything. Suddenly, there was a violent noise in the distance. Trees fell down one after another, as if a terrible beast was running wildly towards this side. Lin Sun squinted his eyes and jumped to a thick old tree beside him. The thick and fat branches and leaves completely covered Lin Sun's figure. Almost at the same time, the violent noise had approached at an incredible speed. But to Lin Sun's surprise, it was not a fierce beast that could uproot mountains and trees, but a majestic young man. How could it be this guy? Chapter 132. In an instant, Lin found that Ning Meng was being chased by someone. Dozens of miles away, a woman and 3 men were chasing Ning Meng aggressively. It was obvious that they wanted to kill Ning Meng by outnumbering him. Isn't this guy afraid of nothing? Why is he running away like a frightened wild boar? A weird smile appeared at the corner of Lin's mouth. In the past, Ning Meng always swaggered in front of him, as if he was the best in the world. But now he could only run for his life in embarrassment, which made Lin want to laugh. But soon, Lin Sun couldn't laugh anymore. Ning Meng rushed towards him and broke the big tree where Lin Sun was hiding with a bang. Idiot! Lin Sun was so angry that he almost wanted to swear aloud. Originally, he could hide in the dark and launch a surprise attack on the woman and the 3 men, but his plan was disrupted by Ning Meng. Although thinking of this, Lin ran his spiritual energy and stuck his body tightly to the branches and leaves of the treetop like a gecko, so he didn't expose himself immediately. And in the process of the falling tree, Lin, who was tightly attached to the branches, was less likely to be noticed by the enemy, unless the tree fell completely. But obviously, Lin didn't have to wait for that time. Just as Ning Meng's figure broke the tree, the woman and the 3 men rushed over. At the same time, Lin Sun's figure, like a flash of black lightning, rushed out from the toppled treetop. The sharp green wave saber, with shimmering water color chopped out, and the cold light suddenly appeared. The woman and the 3 men were Lei Xinyue and her companions. They only focused on chasing Ning Meng and never thought that there was someone hiding in the tree. The sudden attack made their faces change suddenly, and they dodged to one side subconsciously. However, one of the youths was a step too slow. With a pu sound, he was slashed in the shoulder by a saber. The saber's edge slashed down along his chest, tearing open a bloody wound. His stomach was almost cut open. The young man let out a blood-curdling scream. His figure staggered and flew out, falling into the bushes. He didn't dare to move at all, because the injury was too serious. If he moved, it would completely burst open, and at that time his stomach would really be cut open. You're courting death. After a short shock, Lei Xinyue and others had come to their senses and rushed to Lin Sun. Their speed was extremely fast, showing their rich combat experience. All of a sudden, Lin Sun was trapped in the same place, dwarfed and in imminent danger. Especially Lei Xinyue. The sword in her hand was wrapped in terrible lightning arcs. Every strike was fierce and fierce, which posed a great threat to Lin. Aside from Lei Xinyue, the other two youths were also quite skilled. One held a spear, while the other held a long whip. They cooperated very well with Lei Xinyue. "Haha, my brothers are here to help. You bastards who bully the few with numbers. Don't even think about leaving today." In a laughter, Ning Ming's figure broke through the air like an iron tower. He held a large halberd in his hand while lightning flowed all over his body. He was simply like a god of thunder that had descended to the world, and his might was boundless to the extreme. With a rumbling sound, the youth holding the whip let out a blood-curdling screech. His body was sent flying like a sandbag by the halberd. Obviously, Ning Ming was aggrieved that he had to flee all the way before. At this moment, because of the appearance of Lin Sun, the situation suddenly changed, and Ning seized the opportunity to fight back. How could he be polite? "Kill!" Ning Ming roared and waved his halberd, cutting through the air with a momentum like thunder shaking the ninth heaven. Lei Xinyue and the youth holding the sword were forced to dodge with their faces changing abruptly. In just an instant, Ning resolved Lin Sun's pressure. Lin Sun had to admit that Ning Ming's fighting capacity was indeed fierce and fierce. At least, he couldn't do it at present. "Lin Sun, you take care of that boy. I'll deal with this girl. If I don't beat her into submission today, I can't resolve the resentment in my heart." With a loud shout, Ning Ming rushed to Lei Xinyue. "That's the best." Lin Sun smiled and locked his eyes on the youth holding the sword like lightning. Carrying the green wave saber, he rushed over, surging with terrible killing intent and fighting desire. Lei Xinyue's fighting capacity was extremely strong. Lin Sun didn't think that he could defeat this girl in a short time, so it was best to let Ning Ming deal with her. As for the other two companions of Lei Xinyue, one was almost cut open, and the other was knocked out by Ning Ming's halberd. Both of them had lost their fighting capacity and were not worth worrying about. Although the current situation seemed to be 2 against 2 for Ning Ming, the situation had completely changed from before. "Humph! Don't you dare to attack only with the help of your companions? Who was the one who ran away like a crazy wild boar just now?" Lei Xinyue gritted her teeth and fought with Ning Ming, not forgetting to satirize him. "Woman, you'd better not annoy me. If we were not in the bloodthirsty camp, I would kill you with my halberd," Ning Ming roared. He felt extremely ashamed of his escape just now. Now he was ridiculed by Lei Xinyue, which made him extremely angry. He didn't realize that the word "kill" in his words could easily cause ambiguity. Girls always matured earlier than boys. Hearing this, Lei Xinyue spat, and her almond-shaped eyes were about to spurt fire. "I'll kill you, shameless beast." Both of them practiced the secret fighting method of thunder property. Once they fought, it was like 2 thunder gods, one man and one woman, were fighting with each other. The lightning was dancing and the thunder was rolling. The momentum was extremely terrible. On the other side, Lin Sun and the youth holding the sword also fought fiercely. Compared with Yi Qi, the pudgy youth he had met before, the youth holding the sword didn't bring much pressure to Lin Sun. Thinking about it, it was reasonable. The elimination rate of the trainees in Camp 30 was the highest, but the remaining ones were the elites of the elites. Although the number of trainees in Camp 40 was greater, their individual combat effectiveness was obviously uneven. Just like the youth holding the sword in front of him, although he had the cultivation of the 9th level of martial realm, he was much inferior in both fighting means and fighting consciousness. Before long, Lin Sun found an opportunity and performed a piercing formula. The green wave saber drew a straight arc like flowing mercury. With a puff, it stabbed a bloody hole in the opponent's ribs. The opponent screamed in pain and quickly retreated to dodge. Hearing the scream, Lei Xinyue, who was fighting, was shocked. Her beautiful face changed, and she gritted her teeth to escape to the distance. "Still want to escape? Stay here." Ning Ming shouted and was about to catch up with her, but he was stopped by Lin Sun's stern voice, Enough. If you catch up with her and are ambushed again, who the hell can save you like me? Ning Meng's face changed for a while. Finally, he snorted angrily and gave up the chase. In Camp 39, he had always regarded Lin Sun as a friend. Because of Lin Sun, the trainees who wanted to get close to him changed their attitudes and kept a distance from him. If he was really ambushed again, almost no one would save him like Lin Sun did. Damn it, I'll listen to you this time. As Ning Meng spoke, he looked at Lin Sun's opponent, the teenager with a sword. Lin Sun's face suddenly changed, and he felt desperate. Good. In the temporary Camp 39, fatty middle-aged couldn't help clapping his hands and praising. Lin Sun's ability to adapt to circumstances is first class. Although his hiding place was destroyed by Ning Meng at the beginning, he could make use of this change to make the most effective surprise attack. It's really amazing. A rare trace of appreciation appeared on young Ku's calm and elegant face. Lin Sun's performance just now was really good. He defeated a trainee of the opponent in one fell swoop, which was definitely a blow that turned the situation around. It was under this situation that Ning Meng had enough time to fight back. Can the situation be completely changed this time? Young Ku's eyes moved and fell on the position of Shiryu in the light screen. In Camp 40, Residual Wolf couldn't bear the discomfort in his heart anymore. He snorted coldly, and a trace of haze appeared on his feminine and cold face. Lei Xinyue and her companions were defeated. The situation of complete victory was broken by the sudden appearance of an unexpected teenager, which gave top figures like Ning Meng a chance to fight back. Who was this teenager? Residual Wolf stared at Lin Sun for a long time, and finally sighed his heart. He had no impression of this teenager. No impression meant that it was his negligence, and no one could be blamed for it. Without thinking too much, Residual Wolf moved his eyes away and fell on another area in the light screen, where Gong Ming and Di Jun chased after Shiryu together. If Gong Ming and Di Jun were defeated again, the situation would be completely reversed, and Camp 40 would fall into an absolute disadvantage. There was no doubt that the teenager with the sword was defeated by Lin Sun and Ning Meng in an instant, and he took the initiative to admit defeat. In the end, Lin Sun and Ning Meng got 5 nameplates from the 3 defeated trainees of Camp 40. Ning Meng took 2 nameplates and gave the other 3 to Lin Sun. After a little discussion, they decided to go forward together. There was only about an hour left before the assessment. The competition would be crueler at this time. Although Ning Meng was belligerent and brave, he was not stupid. He knew that it was the safest way to act with Lin Sun. How long can you fight? Ning Meng asked with a slight gasp. I don't know. It depends on how powerful the opponent is, Lin Sun said quickly. At present, he had consumed nearly half of his spiritual energy. I can't hold on any longer. Damn it. It's all Lei Xinyue's fault. She chased me with all her strength and consumed a lot of physical strength for no reason. Ning Meng cursed loudly. He was not reconciled to the fact that Lei Xinyue had escaped. Do you want to take a break to recover? Lin Sun frowned and asked. No need. Ning Meng shook his head. When they talked, they were moving forward quickly in the jungle. But just a moment later, Lin Sun's eyes narrowed, and he suddenly stopped. What's wrong? Ning Meng was shocked. He understood it before Lin Sun explained. Because not far ahead, 4 figures rushed here, and all of them were trainees of Camp 40. 2 for each of us, or 3 for me, and 1 for you, Ning Meng said quickly. Lin Sun sighed. The situation is more complicated than you think. When they were talking, there was another rapid sound in the depths of the jungle on the other side. Obviously, someone was also rushing here. All of a sudden, Ning Meng's face became serious. 4 opponents were not terrible, but if there were more, it would be really troublesome. Chapter 133. When the 4 trainees from Camp 40 saw Lin Sun and Ning Meng, they narrowed their eyes at first, but they didn't show any fear. 4 against 2, they still had a certain advantage. But they soon stopped and looked dignified. They noticed that someone was rushing towards them from another direction. Were they enemies or friends? Lin Sun, Ning Meng, and the 4 trainees of Camp 40 were all waiting. Soon, A figure as elegant as a flowing cloud and as fast as a gale suddenly appeared. It was Shiryu. But before Lin Sun and Ning Meng felt happy, they saw two people chasing after Shiryu with all their strength. It could be imagined that the two people who could force Shiryu to run away were not ordinary people. Suddenly, Lin Sun and Ning Meng's hearts sank. On the contrary, when the four trainees of Camp 40 saw the two people chasing after Shiryu, they couldn't help but look happy. It was Gong Ming and Di Jun. Among the two, the former was a master whom the cruel wolf instructor had high hopes for. He was deeply hidden and came from the tumbler Gong family of the empire. The latter was Di Jun, a top master who had already proved himself with his strength. He also had a great background. Now, with the two of them, there were 6 overmatches in Camp 40, which was enough to suppress the 3 opponents. At this moment, the situation was completely clear. The danger and killing intent were also keenly captured by Lin Sun. He made a prompt decision. Ning Meng, do you dare to stop the 4 alone? Ning Meng was stunned and gritted his teeth. Why not? I'll go to help Shiryu and seize every opportunity to get rid of one of the opponents. At that time, the situation will be favorable to us. Lin Sun's black eyes were calm, and he said quickly, this battle is destined to be extremely difficult. Maybe we can all try to fight with our lives. The one who is the most ruthless may be the one who can hold on to the end. Humph. Now the number of nameplates I've seized is enough. Even if I fail and leave now, there is no danger of being eliminated from Bloodthirsty Camp. In this case, I'll play a big game for them. With a fierce look in his eyes, Ning Meng stamped on the ground fiercely. His tower-like figure rushed up violently, and his bulging muscles were full of dazzling lightning. Boom! The halberd danced in the air like a dancing snake. It had a domineering aura that could devour mountains and rivers. Almost at the same time, Lin Sun's body drew a residual shadow in the void, holding the green wave saber, and rushed to Shiryu. Which one is the hardest to deal with? Lin Sun asked quickly. The ugliest one. Shiryu pointed at Gong Ming in the distance, and then his figure stopped. Carrying a pair of bronze maces, he rushed towards Di Jun. Shiryu was very clever, so he had already seen Lin Sun, Ning Meng, and the 4 opponents from Camp 40 in the distance. This situation could not be said to be complicated, but it was extremely dangerous. When he saw Lin Sun's arrangement, he instantly guessed Lin Sun's intention and gave Gong Ming to Lin Sun without hesitation. Gong Ming was indeed strong and extremely difficult to deal with. But Gong Ming was best at defense, which meant that he might be able to suppress and defeat Lin Sun in a head-on fight, but it would take some time. Under such circumstances, as long as Shiryu could defeat Di Jun before Gong Ming defeated Lin Sun, the situation in the field would be favorable to them. Kill! Ning Meng rushed to the 4 opponents. Kill! Lin Sun rushed to Gong Ming. Kill! Shiryu rushed to Di Jun. Although it was the first time for the 3 of them to fight together, they had a tacit understanding. In order to reverse the situation, they would go all out even if they had to pay a great risk. If Ning Meng was someone else, he would think that Lin Sun was tricking him after hearing Lin's suggestion and would not agree easily. Similarly, if Lin Sun was someone else, he would also be suspicious and hesitant when he heard that Shiryu wanted him to deal with Gong Ming. Once such a situation happened, there was no need to fight at all. Their opponents would seize the opportunity to suppress them one by one. The so-called working together and fighting together tested not only tacit understanding, but also trust and a kind of decisive courage. In this respect, Lin Sun, Ning Meng, and Shiryu seemed to have never communicated with each other, and maybe they didn't realize it at all. But their current performance was full of tacit understanding, trust, and courage. All this came from the same idea. They were trainees of Camp 39. Their pride and dignity would not allow any unfavorable factors to appear at this moment. Boom! The fight broke out in this jungle. The scene was extremely fierce. Trees fell, rocks were crushed, and the ground was cracked. The blazing and colorful spiritual energy intertwined and collided with each other constantly. The scene was thrilling. At this moment, Residual Wolf and Young could fix their eyes on this place. They all knew that the result of this monthly assessment might depend on this battle. Bang, bang, bang. Lin Sun held his saber and fought against Gong Ming. His chi was condensed, and he maintained a high degree of concentration. The saber light was like changeable water, sometimes surging, sometimes lingering, sometimes pouring like a rainstorm, and sometimes gurgling like a stream. But even so, he still felt extremely terrible pressure. Gong Ming looked very ordinary and ordinary. He held a long stick made of wrought iron. His movements were neither fast nor slow, and his stick skills were also ordinary. But every blow of his stick was like a thunderbolt, producing a terrible shock force, which made Lin Sun's hand numb and made his blood and chi tumble. Similarly, his defense was as strict as an iron wall. Lin Sun could hardly find any flaw. With a light sweep of the stick, he could easily resolve Lin Sun's attack. It felt like facing an unshakable mountain. No matter how strong the storm was, he would remain motionless. This was Gong Ming. His ancestral secret, 9 Ghost-Down body-protecting cudgel, could be regarded as the first-class defensive skill in the world. It was mysterious and powerful. It was really a headache to fight with such a person. Lin Sun couldn't hurt Gong Ming at all. It was a war of attrition. What made Lin Sun most afraid was that Gong Ming not only had terrible defense, but also had amazing offensive power. Perhaps in the eyes of people like Shiryu, Gong Ming's most frightening feature was his defense. But for Lin Sun, a master like Gong Ming should not be underestimated. But his defensive power was so eye-catching that it was easy to ignore his attack. Bang! A stick smashed down, making Lin Sun's body shake and almost stagger back. It couldn't go on like this. Suddenly, Lin Sun's black eyes flashed a touch of ruthlessness. He rushed up and stabbed the green wave saber directly at Gong Ming's throat, ignoring the stick coming at him. If Gong Ming didn't dodge, he might smash Lin Sun's head with the stick. But Lin Sun's saber was destined to pierce his throat. This was a completely suicidal way of fighting, in which both sides would suffer heavy losses. It was a kind of ruthlessness, not only to the enemy, but also to oneself. Gong Ming frowned. The shadow of the stick changed and suddenly rolled down, shaking the blade of Lin Sun. But this undoubtedly proved that he didn't want to fight with Lin Sun to death. Lin Sun took this opportunity to continue fighting. As long as Gong Ming had to defend, it was advantageous to Lin Sun. At least the attack power he suffered would be much smaller, and he would not be suppressed in a short time. But it was also extremely difficult for Lin Sun to defeat Gong Ming. But this was the best situation that Lin Sun could fight for. As long as he could hold on until Yu killed Di Jun, the whole situation would change accordingly. But just a moment later, Gong Ming's fighting style suddenly changed. Ignoring Lin Sun's attack, he smashed his long stick down. Puff! Gong Ming's waist was cut open, with blood flowing out. But it was just a flesh wound, not a serious injury. Bang! Almost at the same time, Lin Sun's shoulder was hit by the stick. His body sank, and his shoulder bones were almost broken. A sharp pain spread all over his body. It should be noted that Lin Sun's physical strength had reached the level of metallographic jade, which was comparable to the 8th level of martial realm. His body was as strong as refined steel, but it was almost broken by this stick. It could be imagined how terrible the power of Gong Ming's stick was. But Lin Sun suddenly gritted his teeth and stopped his body from falling to the ground. He suddenly arched his body and chopped at Gong Ming again. He had seen that Gong Ming had obviously seen through his intention and began to fight with him at the cost of exchanging wounds. This was undoubtedly an extremely bad discovery. But Lin Sun had no time to care so much. In this battle, he had to pin down Gong Ming, even if he had to pay an unimaginable price. Obviously, Gong Ming was surprised by Lin Sun's tenacity. His stick could paralyze an ordinary practitioner on the 7th level of martial realm, but Lin Sun seemed to be fine. It could be seen that Lin Sun must have an extremely strong capital in body refining. In the following time, Gong Ming and Lin Sun fought in a way that both of them were injured, which was extremely tragic. In just a moment, Lin Sun's skin was bruised and swollen, and every inch of his tendons and bones felt a severe pain, as if they were about to burst and collapse. Similarly, Gongming's body was also covered with knife wounds, dripping with blood, but his vital parts were not hurt. From the beginning to the end, Gongming's expression had never changed. At this moment, beyond imagination, they were both silent and resolute, just like a pair of calm and terrible lunatics. And the bloody and cruel picture was also soul-stirring. Suddenly, Ning Ming's roar came from afar. "I can't hold on any longer. Toy boy, when the hell are you going to fight? You are too weak, aren't you?" This made Lin Sun's heart sink. Ning Ming couldn't hold on any longer. Even without looking back, he could imagine that Ning Ming, who was besieged by 4 people, was obviously more seriously injured than him at the moment. What about Shiryu? How was the battle going on his side? Almost at the same time, a roar suddenly sounded in the field. With a bang, Dijun, who was not far away, was fiercely blown out. He coughed up blood, his face suddenly turned pale, and then his head tilted to one side, and he fainted. At the same time, a horrifying bloody hole was torn open on the left side of Shiryu's chest, and fresh blood gurgled out from it. But Shiryu seemed as if he didn't notice it at all, and he roared with laughter. How could an idiot like you understand how formidable this young master is? Chapter 134. The situation was going to change. In the temporary camp of number 40, Residual Wolf's face was livid and cold, and his emotions were tumbling violently, uncontrollably. When he saw that Shiryu completely suppressed Dijun with the tactic of injuring 1,000 enemies and losing 800 of his own men, he knew that the situation of this melee was irreversible. Young Ku, I underestimated you," Residual Wolf murmured, with some indescribable complexity in his voice. When the Wolfpack tactic meets a powerhouse who doesn't care about their own lives, they have already lost in terms of spirit. Although this is not a war, this kind of situation is very common in war. In the temporary camp of number 39, Fatty middle-aged exhaled a foul breath. He seemed to think of something in the past, with a touch of emotion on his face. "If we hadn't met those fearless madmen of the Empire of the Dark." "Don't mention it again." Yunka frowned and interrupted. Her eyes were still fixed on the light screen. Although she didn't want to recall the past, how could she control her emotions when she saw Lin, Shiryu, and Ning Ming fighting with their lives at all costs? At that time, she, Shu Sanqi, Fatty middle-aged, and others were all young. They all came out of the bloodthirsty camp and had the same courage. But what happened at that time? Young Ku felt a sharp pain in her heart. She shook her head hard and stopped thinking about it. Few people knew that she still couldn't forgive her sister young man because of what happened at that time. Dijun was defeated and fainted. Although Shiryu was seriously injured, his fighting capacity was still terrible in a short time. With his participation in the Battle of Ning Ming, the situation of the melee really began to change. A moment later, one of the opponents was stabbed in the abdomen by Ning Ming's halberd. His whole body flew up and smashed more than 10 miles away. He completely lost consciousness. Almost at the same time, Shiryu swept a pair of bronze maces and stunned his opponent with a head-on approach. "I'm going to help Lin, and you take care of the remaining 2. Shiryu turned and rushed to Lin without hesitation. "Fuck! Since when can you, a toy boy, order me around?" Ning Ming scolded loudly, but he didn't slow down and fiercely attacked the remaining 2 opponents. At this time, the situation had been completely reversed, which made Ning Ming, who had been ready to be eliminated from the battlefield, feel relieved. However, the battle was not over, and he would not let go of the remaining 2 guys easily. On the other side, when Shiryu arrived, Gongming had already fled. In other words, when Dijun was defeated, Gongming had realized that the situation had changed. Especially when he saw that the crisis on Ning Ming's side was also resolved, he made a prompt decision to withdraw. With Lin's current strength, it was indeed difficult for him to keep the man. He could only watch him escape. "This little tortoise is very slippery," Shiryu sneered. He was unwilling to give up. Since the beginning of the assessment, he had been pestered by Gongming. So far, he hadn't even got a nameplate, which was a great shame for Shiryu. Naturally, he hated the culprit Gongming more and more. But soon, Shiryu didn't have time to think too much, because Lin Sun next to him had fallen to the ground with a bang, gasping for breath. At this moment, his entire body was covered in bruises, and every inch of his bones was in extreme pain, as if they were about to break. In particular, the spiritual power in his body was almost completely depleted, and his condition was extremely poor. If he hadn't held on with a strong willpower, he would have passed out long ago. Have a good rest. I, Shiryu, will not let anyone hurt you. Looking at Lin's miserable situation, Shiryu thought of today's experience and felt grateful. I help you not for your gratitude, but because I don't want our Camp 39 to be cut off. Lin panted and smiled. Hey, I didn't know that you have a sense of collective honor. Shiryu shook his head with a smile. Then he turned around and began to search the nameplates on Dijun's body. On the other side, Ningming flew into a rage and roared, Damn it, toy boy. Can you come and help me first? Shiryu replied lazily, Yo, the dignified child Ningming should also ask for help. It's so rare. Damn it, toy boy, you are so shameless. If I didn't save you, you would have been eliminated by others. Ningming was so angry that he swore loudly. Lying on the ground, Lin Sun listened to these conversations and rarely felt relaxed. There were only less than 10 minutes left before the assessment, and all this could finally end. But at this moment, suddenly a clear roar came from afar. Hey, there is indeed a fight here. Ningming, Shiryu, don't worry. I'll give you a hand. With the voice, Qi Kan, when Mingxiu, Xin Wenbin, and Mao Lengshan rushed over from the distant jungle. Lin Sun's eyes suddenly narrowed. They didn't come earlier or later, but at this moment. Who would believe that they just happened to pass by? A cold smile appeared on the corners of Shiryu's mouth as he slowly stood up. Ningming roared. Who the fuck asked for your help? Get out of here. As he spoke, he intensified his attack, forcing the remaining 2 trainees of Camp 40 to be in a more precarious situation. Hearing Ningming's scolding, Qi Kan just smiled, while the faces of Mingxiu, Xin Wenbin, and Mao Lengshan became gloomy. Mingxiu, Lengshan, go to help. Qi Kan ordered. Wenbin, go to check Lin Sun's injury and give him a hand to treat him. From the beginning to the end, Qi Kan completely ignored Lin Sun's opinion, showing an attitude of helping Lin Sun in distress. Hearing the order, Xin Wenbin was ecstatic and vaguely understood Qi Kan's intention. Qi Kan wanted him to take the opportunity to plunder Lin Sun's nameplates. In the same way, since when Mingxiu and Mao Lengshan went to help Ningming, they should have a share of the spoils after the war. As for whether Lin Sun agreed or not, it didn't matter. They came to help. What was more, Lin Sun and the other 2 were seriously injured and no longer posed a threat. No matter what Qi Kan wanted to do, they had to agree. In short, Qi Kan came to take advantage of the trainees in the same camp. Shameless? Yes, but when they did these things in the name of helping, even if Drill Master Young Kan knew it, she couldn't say that they did wrong. Lin Sun understood this. Although he hated them, he didn't have the strength to stop them. He couldn't even stand up. He was seriously injured. Gongming's cudgel almost smashed all his bones. How could he have the strength to stop them? The most helpless thing was that there were only a few minutes left before the end of the assessment, but such a change happened. Anyone would feel aggrieved. Thank you for your kindness. At this time, Shiryu suddenly stood out and looked at Qi Kan and others indifferently. If you don't understand what I mean, I can put it bluntly. You want to take advantage of me? You have to step over my dead body. His voice was resolute and carried a strand of resolution. Qi Kan's face changed slightly, and others hesitated at once. They were very clear about Shiryu's identity. They also knew that Shiryu's character had always been gentle and casual, and he never cared about too much. But they didn't expect that Shiryu would be so fierce and decisive at this moment. Even though Shiryu was seriously injured now, he was after all one of the top masters in Camp 39, so no one dared to ignore his attitude. Qi Kan glanced at the distance. At this time, Ningming had completely defeated 2 opponents, which made Qi Kan feel sorry that he missed a chance. Thinking of this, Qi Kan said, In this case, forget it. But Lin Sun is seriously injured now. It's better to treat him as soon as possible. What he meant was, okay, We won't take advantage of you, sure you and Ning Ming, but we will definitely take advantage of Lin Sun. Yes, that's right. Shin Wenbin nodded hard and couldn't hold back his ecstasy. He didn't expect that he could torture Lin Sun by himself today after being tortured by Lin Sun yesterday. It was such a good luck. He had made up his mind that he would not only take away Lin's nameplate, but also take the opportunity to give Lin a hard beating. After all, there was no rule in this monthly assessment that they were not allowed to kill each other. Even if he would be punished by Drill Master Young Ku afterwards, Shin Wenbin didn't care. Would Drill Master Young Ku eliminate him? Shin Wenbin couldn't wait to rush over. Seeing this, Sure Yu and Ning Meng's faces changed at the same time. But almost at the same time, they noticed that Qi Kan, when Ming Xiu and Mao Lengshin fixed their eyes on them, which made their hearts sink again. They knew that if they took action, Qi Kan would be the first one to jump out to stop them. These guys deserved to die. Sure Yu and Ning Meng hated Lin Sun very much. If they weren't seriously injured, how could they end up like this? However, it was absolutely impossible for Sure Yu and Ning Meng to watch Lin Sun suffer. Even if they had to fight with Qi Kan, they wouldn't hesitate. However, just as the two of them were about to move, an extremely ear-piercing whistle suddenly sounded out from the nearby forest. It was as if some sort of terrifying power was tearing through the air and charging over at an unbelievable speed. All the people present changed their faces at the same time. They were very familiar with this sound. It was the extremely famous standard spiritual weapon in the Empire, bloody, armor-piercing crossbow. Puff! Before Shin Wenbin got close to Lin Sun, an arrow had pierced through his thigh with a string of blood splashing in the air. Shin Wenbin had already let out a shrill scream and fell on the ground dozens of feet away. He was extremely miserable. As luck would have it, Sure Yu happened to be standing there. His lips curled into a smile as he shouted, "There's an enemy attack. Everyone hide. I'll cover Child Shin." As he said, he suddenly lay on Shin Wenbin's body. Although he said he would cover Shin Wenbin, he didn't hesitate to slap Shin Wenbin unconscious. Then he reached out his hand and took away Shin Wenbin's nameplate. If Shin Wenbin was still awake, he would be so angry that he would vomit blood. Chapter 135. In fact, without Sure Yu's reminder, all the other people present had dodged subconsciously. Meanwhile, they had roughly located the hiding place of their opponents. Soon, three figures came from afar. They were Yi Qi, the short and fat teenager, Lei Xinyue, and another teenager with a strange face. Their appearance indirectly interrupted the plan of Qi Kan and his companions, which made them all look gloomy, but no one dared to act rashly. At this moment, the situation was very delicate. Lin Sun, Sure Yu, and Ning Meng were all seriously injured, so they could only pretend to be united with Qi Kan and his companions. Although they all wanted each other to suffer, they could only stand on the same side for the time, being in front of Yi Qi and his companions. After all, they all represented Camp 39. If they killed each other, it would be really stupid, and their opponents would only take advantage of them. Yi Qi and his companions stopped dozens of feet away and didn't move forward. Your performance just now was wonderful. If I didn't admire that guy's sabersmanship and didn't want him to be eliminated, I wouldn't want to interrupt all this. Yi Qi sighed with emotion. The guy, in his words, naturally referred to Lin Sun. Qi Kan and his companions looked a little embarrassed. Not until now did they understand why the arrow just now was aimed at Shin Wenbin. Lin Sun, when did you hook up with the little fat boy of Camp 40? Sure Yu asked with a strange look. What do you mean hook up? Lin Sun said angrily. I can't wait to kill this guy, okay? Sure Yu said in surprise. No way. The little fat boy just saved your life. The relationship between you two seems to be complicated. Lin Sun completely admired this guy. At this moment, he was still in the mood to joke. Hey, we're just appreciating each other. Vulgar people like you, Sure Yu, will never understand. Yi Qi also laughed in the distance. His eyes were small, so when he laughed, they immediately became a line. Cut the crap. Now that you are here, don't think about leaving. Qi Kan saw them talking with each other, completely ignoring the existence of his companions, which made him very angry. Qi Kan, you are not stupid, but now you are incredibly stupid. Don't you find that there are only less than 2 minutes left before the assessment? Yi Chi asked in surprise. Do you think it's necessary to continue this battle? He seemed to be reminding Chi Can with good intentions, but his words were filled with ridicule, causing Chi Can's face to flush red. He roared, "Even if there's only 1 second left, I'll fight to the end." As he spoke, he fiercely charged out, and a cold light shot out from his spear like a swift bolt of lightning. His imposing manner was extremely disdainful. Yi Chi raised his hand with a smile, and a pitch-black armor-piercing crossbow appeared, pointing at Chi Can from a distance. Bang! A sharp arrow with spiritual patterns shot out with a terrifying whistling sound. It tore through the air and shot toward Chi Can at a terrifying speed. Swish! Chi Can's pupils constricted, and he had no choice but to dodge to the side. Bang! 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 It was another round of continuous bursts. Spiritual arrows wrapped in dazzling and frightening luster, like soul-capturing blades rushing out of hell, shot at Chi Can from different angles in an extremely tricky way. This round of rapid attacks forced Chi Can to dodge and retreat again and again. When he dodged the rain of arrows, he had returned to his original position. Seeing this, Chi Can's face became more and more gloomy. This damn black fatty. Well, stop it. After this assessment, we may become students in the same camp. Why do you have to make a fuss and hurt each other's feelings? Yi Chi said with a smile. His simple and honest manner, coupled with his seemingly innocent words, gave people a strong sense of mockery, which could be regarded as a special skill. At least at this moment, Lin Sun, Yu, and Ning Meng's expressions all became a little weird. This little fatty was simply a master of attracting hatred. Everyone who saw him had an impulse to beat him up. This ability was very rare. Chi Can was obviously forcefully restraining his rage, and he was just about to say something when he heard the deep sound of a bell suddenly resound out from the sky, and it sounded out 3 times in succession. This was the signal of the end of the assessment. Alas, it's over so soon. I was going to have a good talk with you. Well, anyway, we will have a chance to meet in the future. Goodbye. Yi Chi sighed and cupped his hands with a smile. Then he turned around and left with Lei Xinyue and another teenager. Damn it, Chi Can squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth. He hated this little fatty to the core. Beside him, Wen Mingxiu and Mao Langshan's expressions changed constantly. Originally, they planned to take advantage of this opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Unexpectedly, not only Xin Wenbin was attacked and failed, but Chi Can was also ridiculed by Yi Chi and others who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The change of the situation caught them off guard. When they came to their senses, the assessment was already over. At this moment, Lin Sun, Yu, and Ning Meng all smiled with relief, but they didn't hide their indifference when looking at Chi Can and others. The intense and cruel first monthly assessment came to an end in this way. In the evening, the assessment results were announced. Lin Sun was healing his wounds at that time. He was so seriously injured that he was directly transferred to the place where the patients gathered in Camp 39. Like him, Yu and Ning Meng were also there. There were specialized medical practitioners in the bloodthirsty camp, and their skills were superb. With the care of these medical practitioners, no matter how serious the injury was, as long as the patient was still breathing, he could be saved. Soon, the assessment results were distributed to each trainee. The first thing that came into their eyes was a line of words. Camp 40 failed. Lin Sun let out a long breath. Finally, he won. This also meant that from today on, Camp 40 would no longer exist. Cheers soon sounded in the camp. Although it was lively, it was sparse and couldn't be compared with the past. This was normal. In a month before the monthly assessment, 26 trainees in Camp 39 were eliminated and left the bloodthirsty camp. In this monthly assessment, 12 of the remaining 24 trainees were eliminated, and they were sent out of the bloodthirsty camp after the assessment because their comprehensive scores were too low. In other words, there were only 12 people left in Camp 39. Lin Sun was one of them. His comprehensive score was still only average. His total score before the monthly assessment was 469 points, which ranked in the middle. In this monthly assessment, he got a total of 7 nameplates, which was a good result. But after considering his previous scores, his score was only average. However, Lin Sun was very satisfied. It was good that he was not eliminated. Damn it, I was surpassed by Chi Can. On the sickbed next to Lin Sun, Shiryu was a little upset. He was very unlucky in this monthly assessment. From the beginning, he was entangled by Gong Ming, which made his score even lower than Lin Sun's. But after considering his previous scores, he still ranked in the top. Hey. On another sickbed, Ning Ming laughed complacently. His score was very good, better than Shiryu, Chi Can, and even better than others, because he was the top one among the 12 trainees left in Camp 39. It's a shame for our Camp 39 to give the first place to such a fool, Shiryu said sarcastically. Lin Sun was helpless. He knew that the two were going to have a war of words again. 3 days later, after the full treatment of the medical practitioners of the bloodthirsty camp, all the patients in Camp 39 had completely recovered and were alive and kicking. At the same time, the news that Camp 40 was ruled out also spread. 18 trainees of Camp 40 were incorporated into Camp 39. Gong Ming, Di Jun, Lei Xinyue, Yi Qi, and others were also among them. They, Lin Sun, and other 12 trainees formed a brand new Camp 39. At the same time, the original 40 camps of the bloodthirsty camp had now become 20. Like Camp 39, each camp maintained a number of 30 trainees. After careful calculation, there were still 600 trainees in the entire bloodthirsty camp. But a month ago, there were as many as 2,000 trainees, which meant that in just 1 month, 1,200 trainees were completely eliminated. The overall elimination rate was really appalling. Naturally, it also proved that the trainees who could stay now were the elites of the elites. On the 4th day after the monthly assessment, the daily training began again. However, many training items have been changed. For example, the actual combat training no longer chose to fight with fierce beasts, but replaced with low-level dark races. The 3 most powerful tribes among the dark races were Voodoo Barbarian Tribe, Abyss Demon Spirit, and Cold Moon Soul Tribe. But for Xiao Empire, Voodoo Barbarian Tribe was the biggest enemy of the Empire. Voodoo Barbarian Tribe was divided into 9 branches, each of which had special fighting talents. The tribe had tens of millions of warriors, which were distributed outside the border of the Empire. As a practitioner of the Empire, the most effective way to know who the enemy was in the shortest time was to fight with the enemy. Although the Empire hadn't had a large-scale battle with the Dark races for hundreds of years, and it was hard to see enemies from the Empire of the Dark in the Empire's territory, it was easy to fight with the Dark races in the bloodthirsty camp. In some extremely secret training fields here, there were many warriors of Voodoo Barbarian Tribe, such as Fire Barbarian, Water Barbarian, Gold Barbarian, Earth Barbarian, Wood Barbarian, Wind Barbarian, Wild Barbarian, Thunder Barbarian, Star Barbarian. The warriors of the 9 branches of Voodoo Barbarian Tribe could all be found, but they were all barbarian slaves of the lowest level. Barbarian slave was a Voodoo Barbarian warrior equivalent to a real martial rel practitioner. From this day on, fighting with the barbarian warriors became a compulsory subject for every trainee in the bloodthirsty camp. Just like the words written on the sword-shaped stone tablet in front of the gate of the bloodthirsty camp. Xiao Flower is invincible because of bloodshed, and the Empire is everlasting because of war. Chapter 136. In appearance, fire barbarians were no different from normal human beings. But with a closer look, many differences could be distinguished. For example, their hair was glowing with a wisp of star-like fiery luster. Their pupils were diamond-shaped, glowing like blood diamonds. In the center of their chest, where the heart was, there was a totem pattern in the shape of a flame. This was their inborn flame pattern, which could be turned into a totem fire armor to protect the vital parts of the heart in battle. At this moment, a descendant of Fire Barbarian stood in front of Lin Sun in a training ground. This was a strong man with the fighting capacity of a 9th-level barbarian slave, which was comparable to the strength of a practitioner on the 9th level of martial realm. Boom! The battle began. The Fire Barbarian rushed forward with dazzling flames on his body. Every inch of his muscles bulged, making him extremely fierce and violent. He punched at Lin Sun. Lin Sun took a deep breath, exerted strength in his palms and fingers, and collided with the fist of the fire barbarian. With a bang, a scorching and terrible force, like a sea of molten lava, crashed into Lin Sun and almost broke his wrist. Sure enough, the physique and strength of these dark races are abnormally strong. If a practitioner only relies on his physique to fight with them, he is doomed to be outmatched. Thoughts flashed in Lin Sun's mind, but he didn't slow down. Exerting strength in his arms, he rushed forward and crashed into the arms of the fire barbarian. With a bang, the fire barbarian was sent flying more than 30 meters away. But in a moment, he got up from the ground unscathed. This was the horror of the voodoo barbarian tribe. They were born with divine strength and bodies as strong as rock and steel. They were born warriors. Shu Sanchi once said in the anatomy class that on the premise of equal cultivation, practitioners could only rely on various spiritual weapons to have the strength to fight with the strong voodoo barbarians. The most important reason was that the physique of most practitioners was far less powerful than that of the strong voodoo barbarians. Human beings, without the protective shell of spiritual weapons, you will always be a group of vulnerable garbage. The fire barbarian rushed at Lin Sun again, with flames surging all over his body. His eyes were full of bloodthirsty madness. Lin Sun frowned. He took a deep breath and fought with the fire barbarian with pure physical strength. Bang, bang, bang. This was like a cruel hand-to-hand fight, with every punch landing on flesh. Every punch of Lin Sun's was powerful enough to smash rocks and steel, but when it fell on the fire barbarian, it just made his body shake a little. On the contrary, every punch of the fire barbarian made Lin Sun's blood boil. Fortunately, the fire barbarian's fighting experience and means were extremely simple and crude, so Lin Sun avoided most of his attacks. Even so, Lin Sun had to admit that if the fire barbarian had mastered some fighting skills that could compete with him, he would have lost long ago. This proved once again that the strong barbarians of the voodoo barbarian tribe were born warriors, and their bodies and strength were the sharpest weapons. 10 minutes later, rumble. Lin Sun suddenly exerted his strength. The spiritual energy in his body burst out and condensed on the surface of his fist. Then he punched out. The air exploded as the fist wind howled, its might terrifying. The fire barbarian never thought that Lin Sun, who had been fighting with him with the strength of body refining, would suddenly use his spiritual energy at this moment, so he was immediately caught unprepared. With a bang, the center of the fire barbarian's chest caved in, and he uttered a shrill scream. "Despicable human!" he roared, but he couldn't stand up in the end. His body struggled on the ground for a long time, and finally died completely. What an idiot. I just wanted to know your fighting strength and means in detail. Now that I've almost understood them, I won't hold back anymore. Is this cunning? No wonder Drill Master Su said that ignorance is the biggest weakness of the voodoo barbarian tribe. Lin Sun stepped forward, bent over, and tore open the fire barbarian's armor. Looking at the collapsed and broken totem fire armor in the center of the fire barbarian's chest, Lin Sun couldn't help but nod secretly. Sure enough, as long as the heart of the fire barbarian was smashed, he could kill the fire barbarian with one blow. However, it was not easy to crush the opponent's heart. The reason was because of this totem fire armor. This thing was like a natural spiritual armor. Since birth, it was branded on the chest of every fire barbarian descendant. It was also called Totem Barbarian Tattoo, which would be activated in a fight and turned into an inner armor to defend the heart. Not only the fire barbarian, but also other branches of the voodoo barbarian tribe, such as water barbarian, gold barbarian, wood barbarian, and earth barbarian, all had this kind of totem barbarian tattoo. In other words, whether one had totem barbarian tattoo or not was the most obvious sign to judge the identity of the voodoo barbarian tribe. Lin Sun drew out the sky breacher and carefully cut off the broken totem barbarian tattoo on the fire barbarian's chest along with the skin. He was very interested in this kind of thing. There was a rumor in the empire that a long, long time ago, the first spiritual tattoo in the world was inspired by the totem barbarian tattoo, and it was inscribed by a legendary master who was well-versed in both ancient and modern knowledge. Although the rumor was not credible, Lin Sun had heard from Master Lu that totem barbarian tattoo was a kind of natural and wonderful tattoo, which contained many mysteries that people couldn't see through until now. If the mysteries could be solved one by one, more incredible spiritual tattoos might be created. Lin Sun was not interested in creating spiritual tattoos, but he was curious about the mysteries hidden in these natural totem barbarian tattoos. At noon, the actual combat training was over. Lin Sun didn't go to the canteen like other trainees, but went to Old Mo's warehouse. This was his exclusive special care. Now in Camp 39, everyone knew that Lin Sun was valued by a spiritual tattooist, so Lin Sun stayed by his side as an assistant. Although Lin Sun still participated in the daily training, he didn't stay in the camp for the rest of the time, which aroused many people's curiosity. Unfortunately, Lin Sun never told them what he did in Old Mo's warehouse. When Lin Sun arrived, young man had already prepared a sumptuous meal, while old Mo was still tinkering with his newly improved spiritual furnace. Young man was a sexy beauty with a voluptuous figure and a beautiful and charming face. It was rare that she was very enthusiastic to Lin Sun, like a big sister who loved her younger brother. Every time Lin Sun came, she would prepare the meal and ask about Lin Sun's training in the camp during the meal. Today was no exception. Lin Sun got used to young man's enthusiasm. Knowing that this sexy and beautiful beauty was really nice to him, he felt quite warm in his heart. Not bad. I can make another breakthrough in cultivation in about 2 months, Lin Sun said casually while eating. 10 days had passed since the monthly assessment. Lin Sun's life returned to the intense and substantial training. Cruel as it was, he would get used to it as long as he persisted. Besides, Lin Sun could clearly feel that his combat effectiveness was improving every day, which made him very satisfied. Don't slack off. Although your performance in the last monthly assessment was good, you still have a long way to go compared with some top figures, young man reminded him. Lin Sun said with a smile, "Of course. If I dare to slack off, I'm afraid that you will be the first to punish me." Young man spat and stared at Lin Sun with her watery eyes, saying, "The quarterly assessment will be held in less than 2 months, which is crueler than the monthly assessment. If you can't reach the 8th level of martial realm at that time, pack up your things and get out of the bloodthirsty camp." Lin Sun raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is the quarterly assessment very difficult?" Young man said seriously, "You will understand at that time that your opponents are no longer trainees in other camps, but the real strong barbarians of the Voodoo barbarian tribe." Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart and nodded. "I see." At this time, old Mo sat down next to Lin Sun and said with joy without eating, "Boy, the battleship will undergo a new transformation in 2 months at most. At that time, I invite you to test its power in person and let you see my means." There was complacency between his eyebrows. Before Lin Sun opened his mouth, young man said disdainfully, "Old Mo, I only know that the transformation of Zing battleship is Lin Sun's idea. I don't know why you are so complacent." Old Mo's face suddenly froze. With a cold snort, he began to eat, but from time to time his eyes would sweep over young man's plump breasts, as if he was retaliating. Young man didn't bother to pay attention to the old lecher and directly kicked old Mo away from the table. Looking at old Mo, who burst into anger and cursed, she just smiled coquettishly, with a look of, "What can you do to me?" Lin Sun couldn't help smiling. Time passed quickly for a month. During this month, after diligent practice, Lin Sun successfully lit up the 4th spiritual star in the sea of his consciousness, which expanded the range of his soul perception to a distance of 400 feet. At the same time, his cultivation was only 1 step away from the fulfillment of the 7th level of martial realm, which was inseparable from the help of condensate pills. During this period, he had to consume 20 condensate pills to practice spiritual energy every day. A condensate pill was worth 10 imperial silver coins, so 20 condensate pills were 200 imperial silver coins. Consuming 200 imperial silver coins a day was enough to make many practitioners speechless, and most of them couldn't bear such consumption for a long time. In the past, Lin Sun couldn't bear such expenses at all. Fortunately, he was in the bloodthirsty camp and had young man's help, so that he could enjoy such treatment without spending points. Otherwise, Lin Sun wouldn't dare to be so extravagant. All this came from his special physique. The 4 spiritual vortexes and the 4 acupoints of the heart vessel could help him hone and absorb more and pure spiritual energy. Perhaps this was also a kind of talent attribute that belonged to Lin Sun, but it was unclear whether it was different from his original devouring abyss. This surprised Lin Sun, but at the same time, he couldn't help feeling a little distressed. He was only at the 7th level of martial realm, but the condensate pills he consumed every day were worth 200 imperial silver coins. How many resources would he need to support his cultivation as his cultivation improved? In the final analysis, cultivation was inseparable from wealth in wealth, companion, method, and place. Chapter 137. Since he entered the bloodthirsty camp, Lin Sun had entered the heaven-accessing place on time every 3 days to pass the test. He had formed a habit. There was no doubt about the benefits of passing the test. It was of great help to the refining of his physique. Just yesterday, when Lin Sun passed the test for the 67th time, he was only more than 30 meters away from the top of the mountain, with numerous waterfalls pouring down. But 1 month ago, Lin Sun could only climb halfway up the mountain. Compared with this, it could be imagined how fast Lin Sun's physique had improved during this period. According to Lin Sun's estimation, he should be able to pass the test called Mill Waterfalls in less than 2 months. The progress in this month also made Lin Sun's score improve a lot. Now, among the 30 trainees in Camp 39, he could already rank in the upper middle position. This kind of progress seemed inconspicuous, but it was amazing enough. It should be known that all the trainees who stayed in Camp 39 were the elites of the elites. It could be seen how fast Lin Sun's combat effectiveness improved since he could rank in the upper middle position in just 1 month. All this also caused a lot of pressure to other trainees. It was no exaggeration to say that all the trainees in Camp 39 were overmatches on the 9th level of martial realm except Lin Sun, who was on the 7th level of martial realm. Lin Sun, who was on the 7th level of martial realm, was ranked in the upper middle position. It could be imagined how much pressure it caused to those trainees who ranked behind Lin Sun, but whose cultivation was much higher than Lin Sun. As young man said to Shu Sanqi, Lin Sun's cultivation seemed to be his weakness, but compared with other trainees, he undoubtedly had a lot of room for growth. Because other trainees already had the cultivation to break through the gang spirit realm, it was difficult for them to make further breakthroughs. However, Lin Sun was different. He was only on the 7th level of martial realm, but he could rank in the upper middle position. What if he reached the 8th level of martial realm? What would happen when he reached the 9th level of martial realm? Anyone who was aware of this would never dare to underestimate Lin Sun again. Facing the gradual rise of Lin Sun, some people were happy, such as Ning Meng, and some were unhappy, such as Qi Kan. Now, Xin Wenbin had failed in the monthly assessment last month and was completely eliminated from the bloodthirsty camp, but the hatred didn't disappear. At least everyone in the small circle of Qi Kan, when Ming Xiu and Mao Lengshan knew that although they had no deep hatred with Lin Sun, they were incompatible with each other. The stronger Lin Sun became, the more unhappy they were. What made them helpless was that if they were in the outside world, they had countless ways to stop Lin Sun's progress and even suppress him once and for all. However, in a bloodthirsty camp with strict rules, they didn't dare to pick on Lin Sun openly. They could only hope that Lin Sun would be eliminated in the training or suffer a crushing defeat in the quarterly assessment that would come a month later. But obviously, no matter which possibility it was, the probability of it happening was very small, because Lin Sun still had enough space to become stronger. He was making progress every day, and it was impossible to stop him. This made Qi Kan and others feel uncomfortable every time they saw Lin, as if they had eaten a fly, but they could do nothing about it. Not only Qi Kan and others, But also the trainees from Camp 40 to Camp 30 also felt the pressure in the face of Lin Sun's rise. Because the current situation was that only Lin Sun made rapid progress in the whole camp, and the others' progress was more reflected in their fighting skills and fighting experience. But Lin Sun made progress in his spiritual power. Spiritual power was the fundamental strength of a practitioner, and it was also the original power of fighting. At the 9th level of martial realm, they might be able to suppress Lin Sun in overall fighting capacity, but as time went by, this advantage would be gradually shortened and even surpassed. This was really very possible. Now Lin Sun could suppress many trainees at the 9th level of martial realm with the cultivation of the 7th level of martial realm. So how terrible would he be when he had the cultivation of the 9th level of martial realm? Many people have begun to realize that Lin Sun might be insignificant in the past, and they thought he was destined to be eliminated, but now, if anyone still thought so, he would be really stupid. Time flew, and soon more than 10 days passed. On this day, Lin Sun successfully broke through the 8th level of martial realm and reached the level of great circulation, and the spiritual power all over his body underwent a new transformation. On the fighting field, looking at Lin Sun opposite to her when Mingxiu frowned. She always felt that Lin Sun was a little different from before, but she couldn't tell what was different. In the training of more than a month, when Mingxiu and Lin Sun had 4 or 5 times in the fighting field. At first, they won more than they lost, but later, they won half and lost half. This change made when Mingxiu very clear that she might be making progress, but Lin Sun's progress was obviously faster than hers. This could be clearly judged from the results of winning more than losing to winning half and lost. No matter how unwilling when Mingxiu was, she had to admit that Lin Sun was rising strongly. Unless she desperately broke through to the gang spirit realm now, she might be able to widen the distance between her and Lin Sun. Otherwise, she would be surpassed by Lin Sun sooner or later. Unfortunately, when Mingxiu was doomed not to choose to break through to the gang spirit realm. The purpose of her coming to the bloodthirsty camp was to enter the gang-producing lake. How could she choose to break through before entering the lake? The most important thing was that once she broke through, it meant that she had to leave the bloodthirsty camp, because the rule of the bloodthirsty camp forbade the existence of strong practitioners in the gang spirit realm. The quarterly assessment will be held in more than 10 days. I don't believe that this guy on the 7th level of martial realm will still be lucky not to be eliminated this time. When Mingxiu took a deep breath and abandoned the distracting thoughts in her mind, she flashed and rushed to Lin Sun in the distance, opening the prelude to this fight. Although she still resisted and hated Lin Sun, she would not be careless. She was not stupid. It was clear that if she didn't concentrate on the fight, she would definitely lose in the end. So as soon as she started the fight, when Mingxiu used her ancestral unique skill, Green Flame Jade Cutting Finger, whoosh, her slender and white fingertips were as sharp as blades, glowing with a green color like fire, releasing a terrible penetrating power that could frighten people's souls. In the past, she made Lin Sun suffer a lot with this unique skill, which also gave her many chances to win. Wen Mingxiu was very clear that Lin Sun must have become stronger recently, so she didn't hesitate to use such a killing move at the first time in order to gain the upper hand and defeat Lin Sun's fighting spirit in one fell swoop. In this way, she could gain a lot of advantages in the next fight. But what Wen Mingxiu didn't expect was that this time Lin Sun didn't dodge her killing move as before, but took the initiative to rush at her. Boom! A simple move of bloody fighting 10 directions in marching boxing came to Lin Sun. What was different from the past was that this punch was filled with a vast, unparalleled, and unstoppable momentum. Boom! Before the punch arrived, the air had collapsed and exploded as if it couldn't bear the power of this blow. It was extremely terrible. At this moment, when Mingxiu only felt suffocated. In a trance, she seemed to see a holy mountain flying from the sky to suppress and obliterate her. Her pores couldn't help but open, and she felt an unprecedented danger. Bang! She didn't even have the time to change moves when she felt the tip of her finger feel as if it was struck by a sledgehammer, and an exceedingly terrifying fist force fiercely pressed down upon her like a tempestuous and raging wave. It shook her to the point her entire body flew out uncontrollably and almost fell off the arena. But even then, her countenance had already turned ghastly pale as she coughed up a mouthful of blood, and her delicate face was suffused with a wisp of uncontrollable terror. It's only been a little over 10 days since I fought. Yet how did he become so strong? This scene also caused a lot of surprise and uproar in the field. Some trainees who noticed all this even narrowed their eyes and showed a touch of surprise. It seemed that they didn't expect that Lin Sun could be so powerful today. He has advanced, someone whispered, with an indescribable complexity in his voice. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Many people finally realized that Lin Sun had broken through to the 8th level of martial realm in less than 2 months. How could he be so fast? Why didn't I find that this guy is so talented in cultivation before? Some people are destined to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Lin Sun was unknown before, but now he rises with great momentum. In the future, he is destined to surpass more and more people. Many people had a complex look. Some were envious, some were surprised, but more were a kind of fear and pressure. Lin Sun had advanced too fast. Since the last monthly assessment, his whole body seemed to burst out the potential of his body, and his cultivation rose by leaps and bounds. It was hard for him not to attract attention. Hey, see, this is my good brother. In the past, many people laughed that he was destined to be eliminated. They were so blind. Ningming looked at his opponent and laughed triumphantly. The faces of Qi Kan and others became more gloomy. Sure, you looked at Lin Sun in the distance thoughtfully. The potential Lin Sun showed had exceeded his expectations many times in a row, which was too unusual. At this time, Gong Ming, Di Jun, Lei Xinyue, and Yi Qi looked at Lin Sun in a different way. I really underestimated him in the past. At the gate of the fighting field, Young Ku's figure was still slender and straight, and her black ear-length hair was dyed with a layer of dazzling luster by the twilight. Looking at Lin Sun in the distance, she couldn't help but be in a trance when she thought of the changes that happened to him these days. From this day on, Lin Sun's ranking in Camp 39 showed a rising trend again, and finally successfully entered the top ranks. At this time, there were only 3 days left before the quarterly assessment. Chapter 138. There were only 3 days left before the quarterly assessment, and the rules of the assessment had already been announced. The rules were very simple. Each trainee acted alone to kill a real strong voodoo barbarian. The loser would be eliminated directly. The low-ranking trainees would also be eliminated. The division of ranking was also simple. The shorter the time to kill a strong voodoo barbarian, the higher the ranking would be. On the contrary, the longer the time, the lower the ranking would be. After the quarterly assessment, 10 camps would be eliminated from the 20 camps. As for how many trainees would be eliminated, it would depend on the results after the quarterly assessment. The atmosphere in the bloodthirsty camp became tense again. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming quarterly assessment, especially when they learned that they needed to kill a real, strong voodoo barbarian alone in this quarterly assessment, who was a barbarian soldier comparable to a practitioner in the gang spirit realm. Even top students such as Shiryu, Ningming, Qi Kan, and Gongming felt a kind of pressure. According to the classification of levels, only practitioners in the gang spirit realm could compete with barbarian soldiers. But now, all trainees in the bloodthirsty camp were in the martial realm. It could be imagined how much pressure they were under to fight with a barbarian soldier who was in a higher realm. Fortunately, although it is a one-on-one fight, we can exchange some spiritual weapons with points. As long as we try our best, it should not be difficult to kill a barbarian soldier. In the canteen, Shiryu muttered, the most important thing is that the opponents of the barbarian soldiers prepared by the bloodthirsty camp for us are definitely not the top ones. Otherwise, it would be difficult for us to compete with a strong practitioner in the gang spirit realm. Li Qiu beside him nodded secretly. Like practitioners in the gang spirit realm, barbarian soldiers had different classifications because of their different cultivation. First-level barbarian soldiers were equivalent to practitioners in the human gang realm. Second-level barbarian soldiers were equivalent to practitioners in the earth gang realm, and third-level barbarian soldiers were equivalent to practitioners in the heaven gang realm. In the quarterly assessment of the bloodthirsty camp, the opponents prepared for trainees would definitely not exceed the level of first-level barbarian soldiers. Otherwise, top trainees such as Shiryu, Ning Ming, Chi Kan, and Gong Ming would definitely lose. Humph, toy boy, are you afraid? Ning Ming said disdainfully on the other side. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Shiryu smiled leisurely. I'm not like you. You only know how to rush recklessly and have courage, but no strategy. Bullshit. Ning Ming pounded the table and said angrily. What are you talking about? Are you scolding me for being brainless? That's what you said. I don't think so. You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it? Gigolo, you're so *king cowardly. What does it have to do with you whether I'm scared or not? The two were like enemies. Whenever they appeared together, they would fight with each other. The trainees of Camp 39 had long been used to this scene. If Lin Sun was there, he might be able to resolve the situation. But today, Lin Sun was not there. Li Qiu, who was caught in the middle at this time, smiled bitterly. He could only pretend to hear nothing and eat in silence. Spiritual Rune Battle Realm, 1,000 heavy waves. When Shiryu and Ning Ming were bickering, Lin Sun was standing on the top of the mountain in the middle of the vast sea. Torrents of waterfalls that looked like white dragons roared and rumbled like thunder. They poured down from the peak of the mountain and splashed tens of thousands of waves on the surface of the sea. It was a spectacular scene. Lin Sun gasped for breath. His wet long hair and clothes stuck to his body, which made him look quite embarrassed. He stood on the top of the mountain, with the waves surging under his feet and the sky high and the sea wide in the distance. Although he was exhausted and sore all over, he was full of lofty sentiments and high spirits. He made it. After entering the bloodthirsty camp for nearly 3 months, he finally passed the hurdle of Mill Waterfalls. At this time, Lin Sun stood on the top of the mountain and looked around. He was very happy, as if he was overlooking the world and all the mountains were small. Before he had time to sigh with emotion, a cold and emotionless voice sounded in his ears. The Seeker has passed the test for the 72nd time and passed the second test of Green Cloud Path. Buzz. With a strange wave, Lin Sun only felt that the scene in front of him changed and disappeared like bubbles. When his vision became clear, he had returned to the Green Cloud Path in the heaven accessing place. At the end of the path was the gate to heaven that seemed to have stood there since ancient times. The test result is medium. The Seeker is rewarded with the first part of Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture and the first part of Tianyuan Saber Play. Along with the voice, 2 light balls appeared out of thin air. Lin Sun was stunned. He had a hunch that he would get a reward like the last time if he passed the test. But he didn't expect that the reward would be divided according to the test result. If the test result was medium, he could get 2 cultivation methods. What if the test result was good? What kind of special reward would he get? Lin Sun suddenly felt a little regretful. If he had known earlier, he would have fought for a good result anyway. Unfortunately, there was no possibility of redemption at this time. Lin Sun could only take this experience as a lesson and wouldn't make the same mistake next time. Lin Sun reached out his hands and touched the 2 light balls gently. In an instant, a stream of mysterious and obscure cultivation method was reflected in his mind like a tide. Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture was a secret cultivation method. It could explore the dark and gloomy of secluded seclusion, understand all mysteries, swallow the image of creation, refine the 10 directions, and return to the great wilderness. The wilderness was the ancient was the origin existed in the Dharma body, and the mysteries were born by themselves. In short, this was a mysterious method to cultivate spiritual energy. With the body as the carrier, the practitioner could have insight into all things in the world and understand the mysteries of all laws. Then he could swallow the spirits of the 10 directions and refine them into the body. producing incredible mysteries. Although it was only the first part, according to the records, it was enough for practitioners to cultivate to the Tao Insight realm. The Tao Insight realm was the fourth realm of the 5 realms of cultivation. It was extremely obscure and difficult. However, there were records about the cultivation method of the Tao Insight realm in the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture. From this, it could be seen how amazing this cultivation method was. It was hard to imagine what kind of mysterious cultivation method was recorded in the second part of the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture. The first part of Tianyuan saber play was a saber play, which was divided into 3 movements: star gathering, moon fetching, and sun burning. Each movement was extremely powerful and obscure. Lin Sun couldn't comprehend even a little bit of it with his current comprehension ability. He couldn't help feeling horrified. This saber play was too incredible. He had learned all the tricks, but he was still confused when he tried to comprehend it. It was like reading a book from heaven. It was amazing. Meditating magic suddenly came to Lin Sun's mind, which was divided into 3 realms: star circulation, moon change, and sun glory. It was used to refine one's spirit. The 3 moves of the first half of the Tianyuan saber technique were called star gathering, moon seizing, and burning sun. They seemed to be 2 completely different cultivation methods, but they all had the symbols of sun, moon, and star. Was there any connection between them? Lin Sun was not sure. Practitioner, the next time Heaven Accessing Place will open is 1 year later. The third test of Green Cloud Path is called 100 Battles. The cold voice sounded again, resounding in the empty Heaven Accessing Place. It was impossible to tell where it came from. You have 3 chances to pass the test. If you fail, the Heaven Accessing Place will be sealed until a chance opens it again after 1,000 years. When the voice fell, Lin Sun's eyes darkened. A familiar feeling of dizziness came over his consciousness, and he got out of the Heaven Accessing Place in an instant. In old Mo's warehouse, a young man held her chin with one hand, staring at Lin Sun, who was sitting cross-legged with her starry eyes. There was a touch of doubt on her sexy and beautiful face. Lin Sun was real in her sight, but in her consciousness perception, there was no trace of Lin Sun at all. It was so weird. Could it be that this guy had practiced some special cultivation method? Young man was a little confused. She couldn't be sure, because she had never heard of any cultivation method that could achieve this step. Suddenly, Lin Sun's body shook slightly, and he opened his eyes. Then he saw young man's beautiful face almost sticking to his face. Young man's starry eyes were blurred, and her breath was fragrant. He couldn't help being shocked and said, "Sister, what are you doing?" He had a frightened expression on his face. Young man knocked on his forehead and sneered, "Don't worry. I'm not the kind of woman who will throw herself into someone's arms." Lin Sun answered and stood up. Suddenly, he found that strands of strange power were surging all over his body. These powers were refining his body at an incredible speed, making him feel like he was floating in the air. This was the benefit of passing the Mill Waterfall's current, which had an incredible effect on refining his body. "You seem to be stronger again." Young man raised her eyebrows and looked at Lin Sun in surprise. She could feel that Lin Sun's temperament had undergone some subtle changes. He became more ethereal, and there was an indescribable spirit in his gestures. "Isn't it better?" Lin Sun said with a smile. "The quarterly assessment will be held in 3 days. I just wish I could become stronger." Young man glared at him and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Let's get down to business. It's a little difficult for you to deal with a first-level barbarian soldier with your current strength. What are you going to do?" Lin Sun said without hesitation, "I can't fight him head-on. I need to prepare some spiritual weapons to show off and arm myself as much as possible." Young man nodded and said, "As far as I know, the other students are also planning to do the same. These days, there are a lot of students going to the resource warehouse to exchange for spirit tools. You should hurry up and prepare, lest you miss out on something good." Lin Sun said with a smile, "Just leave those things to them. I have other preparations." Young man was stunned. "What preparations?" Looking at old Mo, who was busy in the distance, Lin Sun said with a smile. With old Mo, a spiritual tattoo master, it's easy for me to get any spiritual weapon I want. Young man also chuckled. She glanced at Lin Sun with her starry eyes and said, treacherous. I didn't know that you are such a person. Lin Sun touched his nose and said seriously, this is not treacherous. I have helped old Mo a lot. If I don't let him help me, he will always feel sorry. Chapter 139. Staring at the spiritual furnace, old Mo was frowning and thinking. There was only one last key link left. If it could be solved, the spiritual furnace could be successfully transformed and the Ziying battleship would be reborn. However, the last link was also very difficult. Old Mo was not sure that he could succeed at present. He was thinking about how to ensure the maximum success rate. When Lin came, old Mo was a little impatient. Like other spiritual tattooists, old Mo hated to be disturbed when he was working hard. Fortunately, it was Lin who came. If it was someone else, he would have been scolded and driven away by old Mo. You want me to refine a short crossbow for you? Old Mo was stunned when he understood Lin's purpose. Then he became interested. He patted his thin chest and said straightforwardly, that's easy. Leave it to me. You did me a big favor last time, and I haven't had time to thank you. I feel sorry for that. Let me make it up to you this time. I'm sure I'll refine a fine crossbow for you. Lin Sun cast a glance at young man in the distance, as if to say, look, I'm not being treacherous. Old Mo still wants to return the favor. Young man curled her lips and ignored him. What kind of crossbow do you want to refine? 7-star crossbow? Holy crossbow? Repeating crossbow? Or bloody armor-piercing crossbow? Old Mo asked quickly. What he mentioned was the standard crossbow of the Empire, which was a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. It was powerful enough for a practitioner in martial realm like Lin Sun. After thinking for a while, Lin Sun spread out a piece of white paper and took an inscribing pen dipped in ink. Soon, he drew many complicated spiritual tattoos. Finally, he drew a very common crossbow, which was shaped like a cylinder and had a delicate handle at the end. That's what I want to refine. It seems to be called Meteor's crossbow. Lin Sun said with uncertainty. Before leaving the mine prison, Master Lu gave Lin Sun an ancient animal skin scroll and a dark gray inscribing pen. Later, the two treasures merged together by chance and turned into the gate to heaven suspended in the sea of consciousness. However, in the past, there were many spiritual tattoos recorded in the ancient animal skin scroll, which was like the personal notes of a spiritual tattooist. It had been treasured by Master Lu for a long time. Lin had been following Master Lu since he was a child, so he knew the contents of the book by heart. For example, the spiritual tattoo of Meteor's crossbow was recorded in this book. Of course, these were only spiritual tattoos. Master Lu had created the Meteor's crossbow according to these spiritual tattoos. Lin Sun had learned how to refine it, but he did not have the ability to refine a spiritual weapon at that time. Knowing it was one thing, and actually refining it was another. For example, he instructed old Mo to transform the spiritual furnace of Ziying battleship, which required a lot of spiritual tattoo formations. He could explain the mystery of it, but it was impossible for him to inscribe and refine them by himself at present. This was the gap between a spirit rune apprentice and a spirit rune grandmaster. It was easier to know than to do. Lin Sun, who was recalling the past, did not notice that old Mo beside him was staring at the spiritual tattoo formation on the white paper as if he was staring at a peerless treasure. His skinny face was full of surprise, shock, trance, and ecstasy. Lin Sun did not notice it, but young man did. She was keenly aware that something was wrong, but she did not know anything about spiritual tattoos, so she could only watch, not daring to disturb old Mo. She could see that old Mo was immersed in the spiritual tattoo. Disturbing him at this time was more painful than killing him. But what made young man curious was what kind of crossbow Lin Sun was going to refine that made old Mo so excited. 3 days passed in a flash. The quarterly assessment would begin tomorrow. All trainees in all 20 camps were stepping up their preparations. The material warehouse of each camp became the most popular place. Everyone was clear that it was impossible to kill a barbarian soldier comparable to a practitioner in gang spirit realm without some powerful spiritual weapons and equipment in a one-on-one fight. In order not to be eliminated, every trainee did not hesitate to spend points and almost cleared out all the spiritual weapons in the material warehouse to show off. Armors, inner armors, wrist guards, shoulder pads, boots, shields, crossbows, spiritual bows, all became the objects of crazy competition. Especially the crossbow. It became the most popular spiritual weapon for exchange. It was easy to understand that the crossbow had a long range and great lethality. It did not need to consume spiritual energy at all. As long as it was used properly, it could cause great harm to a barbarian soldier. Unfortunately, there were not many crossbows in each camp, and the points needed to exchange for them were extremely high. Therefore, only a small number of trainees could have them. Yi Chi, who already had a bloody armor-piercing crossbow, felt lucky that he had exchange for it in the first monthly assessment. Naturally, he did not need to compete with others for it. But Yi Chi and other trainees in the camp all knew that it was impossible to kill a barbarian soldier with one shot with these imperial crossbows. Barbarian soldiers were not targets. They had the fighting capacity comparable to a practitioner in gang spirit realm, and their fighting skills and experience were not inferior to those in gang spirit realm. Standard crossbows could at most cause some harm to them unexpectedly. This also meant that the main show depended on each trainee's real strength. In Old Mo's warehouse, Old Mo stroked the meteor's crossbow that had just been refined, feeling the coldness on the surface of the crossbow with his fingertips. He looked unspeakably excited. He had never imagined that a crossbow could have so many spiritual tattoos and such a fascinating and exquisite structure. In the past empires, he had never seen a crossbow like Meteor's crossbow, which was only a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank, but had such a complex spiritual tattoo structure. It was conceivable that its power was destined to be far beyond ordinary. Meteor's crossbow was matched with 24 starry frost arrows with spiritual tattoos. The arrows were only 6 inches long and as sharp as sharp shuttles. On their surface, there were fine spirals of spiritual tattoos like flowing water, glowing with a frightening cold light. Although the power of Meteor's crossbow and starry frost arrows hadn't been specifically tested, Old Mo could already imagine how amazing its power would be. The only shortcoming was that the cost of making Meteor's crossbow was too high. The spiritual materials and spiritual ink alone were worth 800 imperial silver coins. If the efforts of a spiritual tattooist were added, the price would be even higher. It's a pity that ordinary spiritual tattooists can't make it, and the cost is too high. Otherwise, it could be mass-produced and equipped for every army of the Empire. In that case, the military strength of the Empire will be upgraded to a higher level. Old Mo sighed with a little regret. When young man learned the power of Meteor's crossbow from Old Mo, she couldn't help being shocked and distracted. This thing was a great killing weapon. She looked at Lin Sun in a strange way. How many secrets did this boy have in his head? How could he take out such amazing treasures inadvertently? Lin Sun didn't explain anything. He took the Meteor's crossbow from Old Mo's hand and turned away. The quarterly assessment would begin tomorrow, and he had to prepare well. This boy's master is a great master. His attainments in spiritual tattoos are at least at the level of a guru. No, even a guru can't match him. At least the damn old guy in Green Deer School can't develop such a unique crossbow. Old Mo sighed with emotion. Where do you think his master comes from? The 4 aristocratic families of spiritual tattoos? Or a hidden clan? Young man asked curiously. She knew that the damn old guy, in Old Mo's words, was the culprit who forced Old Mo to run to the bloodthirsty camp to avoid trouble. Similarly, he was a famous spiritual tattooist in the Empire. Old Mo should say that Lin's master was more powerful than him. It could be imagined how amazing it was. I can't guess. At least I've never seen anyone who can refine Meteor's crossbow or improve the spiritual furnace of Zing battleship. Old Mo frowned and pondered for a long time, but he couldn't think of anyone who could do this. I'm going to find Chief Shu. Suddenly, Young man thought of something and turned away. What are you going to do? Old Mo was stunned. I want to make a bet with him. When the voice sounded, young man's slender and graceful figure had disappeared out of the warehouse. In the central camp of the bloodthirsty camp, the quarterly assessment would be held tomorrow. The drill masters of the 20 camps and some strong men in the camps were summoned. Sitting in the center, Shu Sanchi glanced around like a sharp blade and said, "Fourth Nine, have you finished selecting the barbarian soldiers?" A tower-like, burly middle-aged man stood up and said in a muffled voice, "We've just caught them from the front line. I can guarantee that they're all first-level barbarian soldiers." Shu Sanchi nodded and said, "In order to prevent accidents, everyone must be on guard in the quarterly assessment tomorrow to ensure that no trainee dies in the hands of barbarian soldiers." Everyone nodded in unison. Shu Sanchi thought for a while and suddenly asked, "Who do you think is the first one to kill a barbarian soldier among the 600 trainees in the 20 camps?" His words caused many instructors and powerhouses present to reveal a look of contemplation. "Of course it's by Lingshire of our Camp 7, a bearded man said without hesitation, and many people present nodded. Indeed, Bai Lingshire had the talent of Starshine Eternal, and was the most eye-catching girl in the entire bloodthirsty camp. But the drill masters of other camps all showed a touch of dissatisfaction. Bai Lingshire is really good, but when it comes to combat lethality, he is a little worse than Zhao Yin of our Camp 15. Zhao Yin? Humph! The body of Purple Sun is indeed powerful, but Zhang Sun Hung of our Camp 22 is not inferior to him." As more and more people spoke, the scene suddenly became noisy. They were not convinced and argued with each other until their faces turned red.